The seaplane touched down on the black water at 8:47 p.m., cutting through the perpetual mist that shrouds Tongass National Forest like a burial shroud. 15 years investigating remote property disputes had taken me to Alaska's forgotten corners, but a site inspection this deep into the rainforest, where ancient cedars drink from endless rain and silence has weight, felt wrong from the start. The abandoned research station materialized through the fog, weathered timber structures clinging to the shoreline, windows dark as drowned eyes, and behind it all, 2 million acres of primordial wilderness where things disappear without explanation. My client's cryptic message glowed on my phone. Running late. Don't enter without me. But as the pilot's engine faded into the distance and the forest's breathing filled the void, I realized something crucial. In all our exchanges, I'd never actually met the man who'd hired me. The rain began, not falling, but manifesting from the air itself, and somewhere in those impenetrable depths, something massive moved between the trees. I should explain how I ended up here, how a forest ranger with 12 years of experience in the Pacific Northwest became entangled in something that would shatter everything I thought I knew about these woods. My name is irrelevant now, stripped away by what happened, but the story demands telling. Someone needs to know what walks beneath the canopy of Tongass, what waits in the spaces between the mapped trails and the places we tell hikers to avoid. 3 weeks before that seaplane touched down, I was stationed at the Ketchikan Ranger District, running routine patrols and managing the endless bureaucracy that comes with federal land management. The disappearances had been classified as isolated incidents, tragic but explainable in wilderness this vast and unforgiving. Hikers underestimated the terrain. Kayakers misjudged the currents. Hunters wandered too far from marked trails. The forest claimed them, as it had claimed countless others over the decades. But then Colton Mercer went missing. Colton was one of us, a ranger with 8 years in Tongass, a man who knew these woods like the lines on his palm. He'd been conducting a routine inspection of a remote trail system near the Canadian border when he failed to check in. His last radio transmission came at 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday, his voice crackling through static. Found something at grid reference 47, old structure, not on any maps, going to investigate. That was it, nothing more. The search lasted 11 days. We deployed helicopters, K-9 units, volunteer teams from 3 counties. We found his truck at the trailhead, keys in the ignition, equipment neatly stowed. We found his backpack 4 miles in, contents undisturbed, radio still functional. We found boot prints leading deeper into the forest, following a game trail that wound between moss-covered cedars and through ravines where the light never quite penetrated. The boot prints stopped at a clearing. Not faded, not obscured by rain or debris. They simply stopped, mid-stride, as if Colton had been plucked from the earth by invisible hands. The K-9 units went crazy at that spot, barking and whining, refusing to go further. One dog, a German shepherd named Kodiak with 6 years of search and rescue experience, sat down and howled, a sound I'd never heard from him before, mournful and terrified. We found nothing else. No blood, no clothing, no sign of struggle. Colton Mercer had walked into that clearing and ceased to exist. The official report classified it as a disappearance pending investigation. The unofficial consensus among the rangers was that something had taken him, though no one would articulate what that something might be. Bears didn't hunt like that. Neither did wolves or any other predator native to Southeast Alaska. This was something else, something that moved through the forest, leaving only absence in its wake. I should have let it go. Should have filed my reports, attended the memorial service, and moved on to the next crisis. But Colton had been my partner for 3 years. We'd shared hundreds of miles of trail, countless nights in remote cabins, stories around campfires that burned against the endless dark. I owed him more than bureaucratic acceptance of the inexplicable. So I started digging. The Tongass National Forest encompasses 16.7 million acres of temperate rainforest, islands, and coastal mountains. It's the largest intact temperate rainforest in the world, a place where ecosystems dating back millennia still function as they did before human intervention. It's also a place where records are incomplete, where maps show blank spaces marked only with warnings, where indigenous peoples speak of areas that should not be entered under any circumstances. I spent weeks in the archives at the Ketchikan office, pulling files that hadn't been reviewed in decades. Missing persons reports dating back to the 1950s, incident logs from old-timers who'd worked Tongass before GPS and satellite phones, even fur trapper records from the territorial days. A pattern emerged, faint but undeniable. Disappearances clustered around specific areas. Grid reference 47, where Colton vanished, was at the center of the largest cluster. Within a 20-mile radius of that point, 43 people had gone missing over 70 years. Some were recovered. Bodies found weeks or months later. Cause of death listed as exposure or animal attack, though the reports often included notes about unusual circumstances. Others simply vanished, leaving behind the same eerie tableau: abandoned camps, discarded equipment, footprints that ended mid-stride. What disturbed me most was a notation I found in a file from 1967. A ranger named William Thorne had investigated a disappearance near Grid Reference 47 and submitted a report that was subsequently classified. I only found reference to it because someone had misfiled a cover sheet. The notation read, "Recommend permanent closure of sector. Evidence suggests coordinated predation by unknown entity or entities. Request further investigation by specialized personnel." The request had been denied. The sector remained open. William Thorne transferred to a station in Montana 6 months later and retired early, citing health reasons. I tried to locate him, but he died in 1989, taking whatever he'd seen to his grave. That's when I received the email. It came from an address I didn't recognize, a string of numbers and letters that looked randomly generated. The subject line was simple: regarding Colton Mercer. The body of the email contained a single sentence and a set of coordinates. The sentence, "I know what happened to your friend." The coordinates matched Grid Reference 47. I should have reported it. Should have forwarded it to my supervisor, to law enforcement, to someone with the authority and resources to investigate properly. Instead, I responded, asking for more information, demanding proof, seeking any thread that might lead me to answers about Colton's fate. The reply came 3 hours later. "Meet me at the old research station. Coordinates attached. Come alone. I'll explain everything." New coordinates followed, these pointing to a location I'd heard about but never visited, an abandoned biological research station on a remote inlet accessible only by boat or floatplane. The station had been operated by the University of Alaska in the 1980s, studying salmon populations and forest ecology, but funding dried up and the facility was left to rot. It wasn't officially maintained, but it wasn't restricted either, existing in bureaucratic limbo on federal land that no one particularly cared about. I spent 2 days wrestling with the decision. Every rational instinct told me this was dangerous, potentially a trap, certainly a violation of protocol. But the need to know what had happened to Colton overrode reason. I arranged for a floatplane charter, telling no one my true destination, filing a fake itinerary that would make my absence explainable for a few days. That's how I ended up standing on a rotting dock at 8:47 p.m., watching a seaplane disappear into the mist, surrounded by 2 million acres of wilderness and the growing certainty that I'd made a terrible mistake. The research station consisted of 4 buildings arranged in a loose semicircle around a gravel clearing. The main structure was a 2-story lodge that had once housed researchers, its cedar siding weathered to gray, its windows dark and vacant. Flanking it were 2 smaller cabins, probably bunkhouses or storage facilities, and a 4th building that looked like it had been a laboratory, with a rusted satellite dish still attached to its roof. Rain fell steadily now. That characteristic southeast Alaska rain that seems to come from everywhere at once, soaking through my ranger jacket within minutes. The forest pressed close on 3 sides, hemlock and cedar rising like cathedral pillars into the mist. Behind me, the inlet's black water lapped at the shore with rhythmic susurration that sounded almost like breathing. I pulled out my flashlight and swept it across the clearing. The beam revealed details I hadn't noticed from the dock. Deep ruts in the gravel where vehicles had once parked, now overgrown with moss. A propane tank, orange with rust, lying on its side. What looked like a generator housing, door hanging open, innards long since scavenged or decayed. No lights, no smoke from chimneys, no sign of habitation. My phone still showed the message, "Running late, don't enter without me." I tried calling the number, but it went straight to a generic voicemail. No signal for data, barely 1 bar for voice. I was effectively isolated, exactly as I'd been warned. The smart move was to wait. Stay near the dock, keep the inlet at my back, maintain a position where I could be easily found when my contact arrived. But the rain was intensifying, and the temperature was dropping. Hypothermia is a real danger in Southeast Alaska, even in summer. The buildings offered shelter, however dubious their structural integrity. I approached the main lodge, each step deliberate and cautious. The porch groaned under my weight, boards soft with rot. The front door hung slightly ajar, its frame swollen from moisture. I pushed it open with my boot, keeping my flashlight trained on the interior, my other hand on the bear spray canister attached to my belt. The smell hit me first: mildew, decay, and something else, something organic and wrong that I couldn't immediately identify. My flashlight revealed a large common room with a stone fireplace, overturned furniture, and walls covered in water stains and black mold. A staircase climbed to the second floor, several steps missing. The banister collapsed. To my right, a kitchen area with ancient appliances and counters covered in the detritus of abandonment. I moved deeper inside, floorboards creaking, water dripping through gaps in the ceiling. The beam of my flashlight swept across walls, catching details: faded posters about bear safety, a corkboard still holding yellowed memos dated 1987, a calendar frozen on March 1989. That's when I saw the sleeping bag. It was in the corner, near the fireplace, modern and out of place among the decay. Beside it, a backpack, a camping stove, and several water bottles. Someone had been here recently, within the last few days, based on the freshness of the setup. My pulse quickened. Maybe my contact was already here, sheltering in one of the other buildings. Or maybe this belonged to someone else entirely, another hiker or ranger who'd sought shelter in this forgotten place. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" "Forest Service Ranger." My voice echoed through the empty building, absorbed by rain and distance. No response. I moved toward the sleeping bag, kneeling to examine it more closely. The brand was high-end, the kind serious backcountry campers used. The backpack bore no identifying marks, but when I opened it, I found standard camping gear: rope, first aid kit, fire starter, MRES. At the bottom, wrapped in waterproof plastic, I found a notebook. I hesitated, knowing I was potentially contaminating evidence, but curiosity won. I opened the notebook carefully, tilting it to catch my flashlight beam. The pages were filled with handwriting, tight and precise, documenting observations over several days. The entries were dated, the most recent from 2 days ago. I scanned the text, my unease growing with each passage. Day 3. Movement in the tree line at 03:47 hours. Bipedal, approximately 7 feet tall. Did not match profile of known wildlife. Retreated before I could get clear visual. Day 5. Found tracks near the inlet. 5-toed, humanoid, but elongated. Stride length suggests height of 8 to 9 feet. Depth of impression indicates significant weight. Tracks lead into forest toward grid reference 47. Day 7. Radio interference increasing. Device malfunction unlikely. 3 separate units showing same degradation pattern. Something is disrupting electromagnetic frequencies in this area. Recommend additional equipment for next expedition. The entries continued, each more disturbing than the last, documenting strange sounds in the night, equipment failures, the sensation of being watched. The final entry was brief. Day 9. They know I'm here. I can feel them watching, moving through the trees just beyond visual range. The pattern matches historical accounts. They're curious, testing boundaries. I need to make contact before... The entry ended mid-sentence, the pen trailing off into a scrawl. I closed the notebook, my hands trembling. This wasn't some random camper. This was someone conducting research, someone who'd come here deliberately looking for whatever haunted these woods, someone who might have found it. A sound from upstairs froze me in place. A soft scraping, like something being dragged across wood. I killed my flashlight instinctively, plunging the room into darkness. My eyes adjusted slowly, finding the faint gray light coming through the grimy windows, barely enough to see shapes, but not details. The scraping continued, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from directly above me. Something was up there, moving through the second floor. I drew my bear spray, thumbing off the safety, and moved toward the staircase. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get back to the dock and wait for the float plane to return, to abandon this investigation and report everything to proper authorities. But Colton's face flashed in my mind, the way he'd looked the last time I saw him, smiling as he packed his truck for what should have been a routine patrol. I started up the stairs, testing each step before committing my weight. The banister was gone, leaving only open space to my right, a 10-foot drop to the common room below. The scraping grew louder as I climbed, more distinct now. Something heavy being moved, furniture perhaps, or equipment. The second floor consisted of a central hallway with 4 doors, 2 on each side. All the doors were open, except one, the farthest on the left. The scraping came from behind that closed door. I approached slowly, flashlight still off, trying to move silently despite the creaking floorboards. When I reached the door, I pressed my ear against it, listening. The scraping had stopped. In its place, I heard breathing, slow, deliberate, too loud to be human. My hand found the doorknob. It was cold, slick with moisture. I turned it slowly, feeling the mechanism disengage, and pushed. The door swung inward onto a scene that made no sense. The room had been a dormitory once, with 4 metal bed frames still bolted to the floor. The window on the far wall was shattered, rain pouring in, pooling on the warped floorboards. And in the center of the room, arranged in a careful circle, were 6 photographs. I turned on my flashlight, the beam illuminating the images. They were surveillance photos, grainy and taken from a distance, showing people in various locations throughout Tongass. I recognized several faces immediately, hikers who'd been reported missing over the past 2 years. In the center of the circle was a photo that punched the air from my lungs. Colton standing at a trailhead, taken the day he disappeared. Beneath each photo was a piece of paper with handwritten notes. I moved closer, reading the neat script. Subject 7, male, 34, experienced hiker. Claimed at 14:23 hours, grid 47B. Duration of pursuit, 2.3 hours. Status, converted. Subject 12, female, 28, solo kayaker. Claimed at 08:34 hours, grid 47F. Duration of pursuit, 1.1 hours. Status, converted. The notes continued, each photo matched with similar annotations, clinical and detached, describing human beings as specimens in some grotesque experiment. Colton's note read, Subject 18, male, 36, Forest Service Ranger, high-value target, claimed at 14:17 hours, grid 47A. Duration of pursuit, 4.7 hours. Status, prime conversion candidate. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the flashlight. Converted. The word echoed in my mind, terrible in its implications. Whatever had taken these people, whatever lived in these woods, wasn't simply killing them. It was changing them, transforming them into something else. A footstep behind me. I spun, bear spray raised, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the faint light from the hallway. My heart hammered, finger tightening on the spray trigger. Stand back, I commanded, voice steadier than I felt. Forest Service, identify yourself. The figure stepped forward into my light, and my breath caught. It was a woman, mid-30s, dark hair plastered to her skull by rain, wearing hiking gear that had seen better days. Her face was gaunt, eyes hollow, but alert and intelligent. You're the one investigating Colton Mercer, she said. Her voice was hoarse, strained. You shouldn't have come here. Who are you? I demanded, not lowering the spray. She looked past me at the circle of photographs, and her expression twisted into something between grief and fury. My name is Savannah Blake. I'm a wildlife biologist. Or I was, before I found out what they're really doing in these woods. The way she said they sent ice down my spine. Explain. Now. Savannah moved past me, deliberately ignoring the bear spray, and knelt beside the photographs. She touched Colton's image gently, almost reverently. Your friend isn't dead, she said quietly. At least, not in the way you think. None of them are. I lowered the spray slightly, confusion warring with suspicion. The disappearances. You know what's happening? She looked up at me, and I saw tears tracking through the grime on her face. I know because I've seen them. The converted. They're still here, in the forest, but they're not human anymore. Not completely. You're not making sense. Savannah stood, pulling out a waterproof case from her jacket. She opened it, revealing a small tablet computer, screen cracked but functional. Let me show you something. These woods, this entire region around grid reference 47, it's not what anyone thinks. The government knows. They've known for decades. She pulled up files, documents marked with classifications I'd never seen. Security clearances far above my pay grade. The screen showed reports dating back to 1952, detailing expeditions into Tongass, strange findings, encounters with unknown entities. My eyes locked onto one document title, Project Timberline, Study of non-human intelligence in Pacific Northwest temperate zones. This is classified material, I said. How did you get this? My research partner worked for DARPA, Savannah replied, before he disappeared 6 months ago. He gave me access to everything, told me to continue the work if anything happened to him. And something did happen. The same thing that happened to Colton, to all of them. She scrolled through images that made my stomach turn. Photographs taken with night vision equipment showing humanoid figures moving through the forest, their proportions wrong, limbs too long, movements fluid and unnatural. Thermal imagery revealing heat signatures clustered in areas that should have been uninhabited, patterns too organized to be animal behavior. What are they? I whispered. Savannah met my eyes. We don't know exactly. The indigenous peoples call them the forest walkers, spirits that take human form to move among us. The military classification is Entity Type 7, autonomous biohybrid organisms. In simple terms, they're something between human and something else, created or evolved through processes we don't fully understand. Created? You mean these things were made? The evidence suggests they were human once. The conversion process involves exposure to something in this region, a fungus maybe, or a parasitic organism, possibly something that only exists here in Tongass. It gets into your system, rewrites your biology from the inside out. It takes days, sometimes weeks, but eventually you change. You become one of them. My mind reeled, trying to process what she was telling me. The research station, the experiments in the 80s. What were they really studying? They were trying to understand the conversion process, hoping to weaponize it or prevent it. The station was shut down when half the research team disappeared. The official story was budget cuts and accidents. The truth was that they lost control of their subjects. Subjects? You mean people they converted deliberately? Savannah's expression hardened. The government has been abducting hikers and homeless people for years, using them as test subjects. Your friend Colton stumbled onto one of their old facilities. That's why they took him. He saw too much. The room felt like it was tilting. If what she was saying was true, then everything I'd believed about Colton's disappearance, about all the disappearances, was a lie. Not random tragedies, but systematic abductions, a conspiracy spanning decades, hidden beneath the vast indifference of the wilderness. We need to leave, I said. We need to report this. Get federal investigators out here. It's too late for that, Savannah interrupted. They know you're here. That email you received, the one that brought you to this place, it wasn't from me. I've been hiding here, watching, trying to document everything. But someone else lured you out here. The realization hit like a physical blow. The email, the coordinates, the convenient timing, it had all been a trap. But who had sent it, and why? As if in answer, a light appeared outside the window, cutting through the rain. Not a flashlight. Something brighter, artificial, like a spotlight. Then another, and another, until the clearing was illuminated in harsh white light. They're here, Savannah breathed, her face draining of color. We ran. Down the stairs, through the common room, out the front door, into rain that felt like needles. The lights were converging on the research station from multiple directions, figures moving behind them, too many to count. I caught glimpses of vehicles, military-style trucks with all-terrain modifications, armed personnel in tactical gear. The inlet, I gasped. The dock. Savannah grabbed my arm, pulling me sideways toward the forest. No, they'll have boats. We need to go deeper, into the trees. That's suicide. We'll be lost in minutes. We're already lost, she shot back. Our only chance is to reach the old bunker. It's 3 miles north, built during the Cold War. They can't track us underground. She didn't wait for agreement, just plunged into the tree line. I followed, having no better option, branches whipping my face as we crashed through undergrowth. Behind us, shouts echoed across the clearing, orders being barked, the mechanical sound of weapons being readied. The forest swallowed us immediately. Even with our flashlights, visibility was measured in feet. The rain had turned the ground into a slick morass of mud and rotting vegetation. We slipped and stumbled, grabbing at trees for support, fighting through dense ferns and devil's club that tore at exposed skin with venomous thorns. We ran for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, finally pausing in a hollow beneath a massive fallen cedar. Our breath came in ragged gasps, steam rising in the cold air. Behind us, light still flickered through the trees, but more distant now, the sounds of pursuit muted by rain and distance. Who are they? I managed between breaths. Military? Government contractors? Savannah shook her head. I don't know anymore. The project was supposedly shut down in 1991, but clearly it continued. Someone is still funding this, still conducting experiments. The converted, if they exist, if this isn't some insane conspiracy theory, where are they? Why haven't we seen any? You have, she said quietly. You just didn't recognize them. Some can pass for human, especially in the early stages. They integrate into communities, into the Forest Service, into law enforcement. They're everywhere, and they're watching, waiting. That's paranoid, is it? How do you think they always know where to find people who get too close to the truth? How do you think Colton was targeted so specifically? She grabbed my jacket, pulling me close. Listen to me. Your partner, the one who probably recommended you for this assignment. Did they seem different lately? Off in any way? My supervisor, Rowan Travers, flashed in my mind. He'd been acting strangely for months, disappearing for days at a time on unexplained assignments, returning with vague reports that didn't match the time he'd been gone. He'd been the one who suggested I look into the historical disappearances, who'd given me access to the archived files. Oh, God, I whispered. Savannah saw the recognition in my eyes. Yeah, they've been close to you for a while. Colton's disappearance wasn't random. You were supposed to investigate, supposed to follow the trail, supposed to end up exactly where you are now. This whole thing is designed to bring people like us, people who ask questions, who won't accept easy answers, out into the wilderness where we can be converted or eliminated. Then we're already dead. Not yet. The bunker is real, and it's shielded. Old military construction, lead-lined walls that block their tracking technology. If we can reach it, we can hide long enough to figure out our next move. We started moving again, Savannah leading with the confidence of someone who traveled this route before. The terrain grew more difficult, climbing steep ravines where roots provided the only handholds, crossing streams swollen with rain, navigating around deadfalls the size of houses. An hour passed, then another. My body screamed in protest, muscles burning, lungs aching. The rain never stopped, never even slowed, just continued its relentless assault. Several times we heard sounds in the darkness, branches breaking, footsteps that weren't ours, voices calling out in languages I didn't recognize. Once, we saw one of them clearly. It stood in a clearing ahead, illuminated briefly by a shaft of moonlight breaking through the clouds. At first glance, it looked human, the right height, the right proportions. But something was wrong with the way it moved, joints bending at angles that shouldn't be possible, head turning too far, too fast. Its eyes reflected our flashlight beams like an animal's, glowing pale green in the darkness. Savannah grabbed my arm, pulling me behind a tree. We held our breath as the thing turned in our direction, head cocked as if listening. It took a step toward us, then another, movement smooth and predatory. I could see details now that made my skin crawl. Fingers too long, neck elongated, skin that seemed to shift and flow like it wasn't quite solid. The thing opened its mouth, and a sound emerged that was almost words, almost human speech, but distorted and layered, as if multiple voices were trying to speak through one throat. Come out. We can help you. Understand. Savannah's hand clamped over my mouth, muffling the whimper I couldn't suppress. We remained frozen as the thing moved closer, now less than 30 feet away. It stopped at the base of our tree, looking up, those horrible eyes sweeping across the branches above us. Then, impossibly, it smiled. The expression was grotesque, too wide, revealing teeth that were too sharp and too numerous. It raised one elongated hand toward us in a gesture that might have been friendly in any other context, but here, now, was simply horrifying. We know what you are, the thing said, voice gaining clarity. We were like you once, before we understood. A sound in the distance, a mechanical whir, like a drone or helicopter, made the thing's head snap around. It listened for a moment, then looked back at us one final time. They will find you, it said. Unless you join us. willingly. Then it was gone, vanishing into the forest with inhuman speed, leaving only the whisper of disturbed foliage and a smell like ozone and rotting fish. We didn't move for 5 full minutes, listening to our hearts hammer, waiting to see if it would return or if others would come. When Savannah finally released my mouth, I doubled over, gasping, fighting the urge to vomit. "What the hell was that?" I managed. "That was a converted," Savannah said, her voice shaking. "Mid-stage transformation, another few months, and it won't be able to pass for human at all." But it talked. It tried to communicate. They always do at first. The fungus or parasite or whatever it is. It doesn't just change the body. It changes the mind, rewires priorities, creates a new imperative. The converted want to spread, to bring more people into their collective. They genuinely believe they're helping, offering enlightenment or evolution or whatever they've been programmed to call it. Programmed? You think this is artificial? I think it started artificial years ago, some experiment in bioengineering gone wrong. But now it's self-perpetuating, beyond anyone's control. The military isn't trying to weaponize it anymore. They're trying to contain it, to keep it from spreading beyond Tongass. And they use people like us, people who investigate too deeply, as test subjects to understand how it works. Exactly. "We need to get to that bunker," I said, standing on shaking legs, "before they send more of those things." The final mile was the hardest. The terrain became vertical in places, requiring actual climbing, our hands numb from cold and exertion. Twice more we heard the converted moving through the forest, their calls echoing through the trees, always closer than comfortable. The pursuit had become a hunt, coordinated and methodical, and we were running out of places to hide. When we finally reached the bunker, I almost walked past it. The entrance was hidden beneath decades of overgrowth, marked only by a rusted metal hatch barely visible through ferns and moss. Savannah dropped to her knees, pulling away vegetation to reveal a numeric keypad, its display miraculously still functioning after all these years. "How do you know the code?" I asked. "My partner gave it to me before he disappeared," she said, fingers flying over the keys. "He said if anything happened, if the project came for us, this was the only safe place left." The hatch unlocked with a heavy clunk. Savannah pulled it open, revealing a ladder descending into absolute darkness. Without hesitation, she swung onto the ladder and started down. I followed, pulling the hatch closed above us, hearing the lock re-engage automatically. We descended 20 feet into a chamber that smelled of concrete dust and stale air. At the bottom, Savannah found a switch, and ancient fluorescent lights flickered to life, revealing a space larger than I'd expected. A military facility designed to house personnel during nuclear war, now serving as refuge from horrors its builders never imagined. The bunker consisted of multiple rooms connected by narrow corridors. We found bunks, a kitchen with rations that were decades past expiration, a communications room with equipment that looked like museum pieces, and a central chamber with maps of Tongass covering every wall, marked with annotations and coordinates that told a story of systematic invasion. Grid reference 47 was at the center, marked with a red circle and a single word, epicenter. Surrounding it, concentric rings showed the spread of conversion cases year by year, expanding slowly but inexorably. By the map's last update, dated 2019, the affected zone covered nearly 50 square miles and was still growing. "This is it," Savannah said, standing before the map. "The source of everything. Whatever started the conversion process, whatever created the first of those things, it came from here. We need to destroy it," I said. "Burn the forest if we have to. Sterilize the entire area." "You can't burn Tongass," she replied. "It's too wet, too vast, and fire would only spread the spores or mycelia or whatever vector transmits the conversion. No, the only way to stop this is to understand it, to find a cure or a treatment. Or to expose it," I said. "To force the government to admit what they've been covering up, make them commit resources to actually solving the problem." Savannah smiled sadly. "You still think the government wants to solve it? They've had 70 years. If they wanted to end this, they would have. No, someone high up has decided the conversion process is valuable, worth preserving, worth studying. We're not dealing with a mistake they want to fix. We're dealing with a program they want to continue." The truth of her words settled over me like a shroud. We were trapped in a bunker miles from civilization, hunted by creatures that shouldn't exist, betrayed by institutions sworn to protect people, with no allies and no way to call for help. So what do we do? I asked. Savannah walked to the communications room, running her hands over the ancient equipment. We document everything. Every file I have, every photo, every piece of evidence. We upload it to somewhere they can't scrub it. Multiple sites, distributed networks, places that automatically publish if we don't check in. Then we make them come to us. That's suicide. Maybe, she agreed. But it's also the only way to ensure the truth survives, even if we don't. We spent the next 6 hours working frantically. Savannah had more data than I'd imagined, years of research compiled from her partner's files, her own investigations, interviews with survivors who'd escaped conversion, satellite imagery showing movement patterns, even audio recordings of the converted attempting communication. Together, it painted a picture of something vast and terrifying, a shadow ecosystem existing alongside humanity, feeding on it, transforming it. I contributed everything I'd gathered, the archived reports, William Thorne's classified documents, the photographs from the research station, my own recordings of Colton's last known movements. We organized it all into a comprehensive package, damning in its completeness, impossible to dismiss as conspiracy theory or paranoia. As we worked, I asked the question that had been gnawing at me. Why haven't they stormed the bunker? They know we're here. They must have tracking technology that could pinpoint our location. Savannah didn't look up from her laptop. They will. They're probably gathering forces now, deciding how to handle us. But they'll be cautious. This bunker was built to withstand direct nuclear strikes. The hatch is designed to resist breaching charges. The walls are reinforced concrete lined with lead, and there's only one entrance. They can't gas us out without risking the conversion spreading through ventilation systems to their own people. So we have time. A little. Enough to finish this. At 4:37 a.m., we uploaded the final file. Savannah had routing protocols that bounced our signal through servers in 12 countries, fragmenting and encrypting the data, ensuring that even if one copy was destroyed, others would survive. She'd set deadman switches that would automatically publish everything to media outlets, researchers, and activists if we failed to check in every 72 hours. It's done, she said, leaning back. Whatever happens now, the truth is out there. I felt no triumph, only exhaustion and creeping dread. Now what? Now we rest, she said, and wait for them to make their move. We didn't have to wait long. The first sounds came just before dawn. Heavy equipment moving above us, the rumble of engines and machinery. Through a periscope system built into the bunker's design, we could see vehicles surrounding the hatch, portable lights illuminating the area like a construction site. Personnel moved with military precision, establishing a perimeter, setting up what looked like containment tents. They're not trying to breach, Savannah observed. They're setting up for something else. A loudspeaker crackled to life, the voice that emerged familiar and gut-wrenching. This is Ranger Rowan Travers. I know you can hear me. Come out peacefully, and I give you my word, no harm will come to you. My supervisor, the man I'd trusted, who'd guided my career, who'd sat across from me at countless briefings and strategy sessions. Hearing his voice now, knowing what he'd become, felt like betrayal compounded by tragedy. Don't respond, Savannah whispered. It's a psych tactic. They want to establish communication, make us feel like there's room for negotiation. The voice continued. I understand you're frightened. I understand you think you're doing the right thing by exposing what you've found, but you don't understand the full picture. The conversion isn't what you think. It's not an infection or a parasitic takeover. It's evolution, humanity's next step. We're trying to help people transition peacefully, voluntarily. You could be part of that. He's insane, I breathed. No, Savannah said. He's converted. This is what they all say, once the transformation is complete. They genuinely believe they're ascending to something better. Rowan's voice took on a harder edge. You've uploaded sensitive information to public networks. That was unwise. We're already working to remove it, and we'll succeed. But the fact that you tried, that shows initiative, intelligence, exactly the qualities we value. Join us willingly, and you'll keep your memories, your personality, everything that makes you who you are. You'll just be better, stronger, part of something larger than yourself. The offer was obscene in its sincerity. He really believed he was being generous, offering salvation instead of damnation. We're not coming out, I shouted toward the periscope, knowing the sound would carry. Whatever you've become, we want no part of it. Silence for a long moment. Then Rowan's voice returned, colder now. So be it. You'll stay in there until your supplies run out. We can wait. This forest has infinite patience. The lights went out outside, the vehicles pulling back to a perimeter. They were settling in for a siege. Savannah checked our supplies. Water for maybe 5 days if we rationed carefully. No food except expired military rations that would probably make us sick. Power was self-contained, a nuclear battery system designed to last decades. But that didn't matter if we died of thirst or starvation. We have to try to break out, I said. Tonight, when it's dark, we might be able to slip past their perimeter. They'll have night vision, thermals, motion sensors. We wouldn't make it 50 feet. Then we die in here. Maybe, Savannah said, or maybe something else. She led me back to the communications room, where she'd been working on something I hadn't noticed during our frantic file compilation. A radio system, heavily modified, connected to equipment I didn't recognize. What is this? I asked. A long shot, she replied. The converted communicate somehow, coordinate their movements and strategies. There has to be a signal, some frequency they use. My partner theorized it was subsonic, below normal human hearing. If we can tap into that frequency, we might be able to disrupt their communication, create enough chaos to slip away during the confusion. Can that actually work? She smiled grimly. We'll find out. She spent the day making adjustments, calibrating equipment, testing frequencies that made my teeth ache and my eyes water. Through the periscope, I watched the perimeter, counting personnel, noting shift changes, looking for any weakness we could exploit. As night fell again, Savannah declared herself ready. The device she'd built looked like something from a mad scientist's laboratory, a jury-rigged assemblage of old radio equipment, car batteries, and components I couldn't identify. She'd connected it to the bunker's antenna system, giving it the power to broadcast for miles. When I activate this, she explained, it's going to flood the entire area with disrupted signals across multiple frequencies. It'll disorient the converted, maybe cause them pain, definitely interrupt whatever communication network they use. But it'll also announce our position to anyone with the right equipment, including military units that might be monitoring the region. So it's all or nothing, I said. Always has been. She set a timer. 15 minutes to give us time to prepare, to reach the hatch, to be ready to run the moment the signal activated. We gathered what we could carry. Flashlights, a first aid kit, water bottles, the copies of our evidence stored on multiple drives. Savannah strapped on a pack that contained explosives she'd found in the bunker's armory, charges designed for demolition that she planned to deploy if we were cornered. At the hatch, we waited, listening to the timer count down. My heart hammered, mouth dry despite having just drunk water. Every second felt like an hour, every minute like a lifetime. 10 seconds. 5. The device activated with a sound that was more felt than heard, a pressure wave that rippled through the air, through the ground, through our bones. Outside, chaos erupted immediately. Screams, shouts, the sound of equipment failing, vehicles starting and stalling. Savannah threw open the hatch, and we climbed out into pandemonium. The converted were scattered across the clearing, many on their hands and knees, others stumbling blindly, all of them clearly in distress. The human personnel were equally affected, clutching their heads, shouting into radios that spewed only static. In the confusion, no one immediately noticed us emerging from the bunker. We ran. Into the forest, away from the lights and chaos, using the darkness and the disrupted command structure to put distance between us and our pursuers. Behind us, the sound of the device continued its terrible broadcast, a beacon of interference that would buy us time, but also mark our starting point for anyone who came looking. We ran for hours, long past the point of exhaustion, driven by adrenaline and terror. The forest was different at night, alive with sounds that might have been animals or might have been something else, shadows that moved with purpose, the constant sensation of being watched by countless eyes. Dawn found us on a ridge overlooking a river valley, miles from the bunker, completely lost but still free. We could see smoke rising in the distance, marking the location we'd fled, and even from here we could see helicopters circling, search teams deploying. They're not going to stop, Savannah said, slumped against a tree. They can't afford to let us escape, not after what we've released. Then we keep moving, I replied. We find civilization, find people who can help, find someone who'll listen. She pulled out her tablet, checking it despite the cracked screen and low battery. The files were still uploading, still propagating across the network, still reaching new servers and mirrors every minute. Even if they caught us now, the information was out there, growing, spreading, taking on a life of its own. "We did it," she said with something like wonder. "We actually did it." "We survived," I corrected. "Whether we actually accomplished anything, that remains to be seen." We started moving again, following the river downstream, reasoning that water always led to human habitation eventually. The day warmed, the rain finally stopping, sun breaking through the canopy in shafts of golden light that seemed almost surreal after so many hours of darkness and fear. That's when we heard it, a voice, human and normal, calling from somewhere ahead. "Hello? Is someone there? We need help." Savannah grabbed my arm, her face suddenly pale. "It's a trap. It has to be. But what if it's not? What if there are other survivors, other people who've escaped?" We approached cautiously, following the voice to a small clearing where a young woman sat against a tree, her leg clearly broken, her face pale with pain and shock. She looked up as we emerged, relief flooding her features. "Oh, thank God," she breathed. "I've been here for hours. I fell during a hike. My phone has no signal. Please, you have to help me." Every instinct screamed danger, but she looked so normal, so genuinely distressed. I moved toward her, Savannah hissing warnings behind me, but unable to ignore another human in need. I knelt beside the woman, examining her leg, noting the unnatural angle. "What's your name?" I asked, pulling out my first aid kit. She smiled, and I saw it too late. The wrongness in her eyes, the slight elongation of her fingers as she reached for me, the way her neck bent just a fraction too far. "My name," she said in a voice that layered and echoed, "is Colton Mercer." The thing wearing my friend's name lunged, fingers stretching impossibly long, reaching for my throat. I threw myself backward, Savannah's gunshot ringing out, the bullet catching the creature in the shoulder and spinning it around. It shrieked, a sound no human throat could produce, and collapsed. We ran again, abandoning our supplies, abandoning any thought except escape. More voices called from the forest now, some familiar, some not. All of them saying the wrong things, moving the wrong ways, hunting us with predatory focus. The river was ahead, fast-moving and dangerous, but offering the only route away from the converted, converging on our position. Without hesitation, we plunged in, the current immediately seizing us, pulling us downstream, battering us against rocks and submerged logs. I lost sight of Savannah almost immediately, pulled under by the current, tumbling helplessly, lungs burning, limbs flailing for purchase that didn't exist. The world became water and chaos, light and darkness alternating as I surfaced and submerged, certain that each breath would be my last. Then suddenly, I was on a gravel bar, vomiting water, gasping air, alive but barely. I looked around frantically for Savannah, seeing nothing but empty river and forest on both banks. "Savannah!" I screamed. "Savannah!" No answer. Just the river's roar and my own labored breathing. I searched the gravel bar, the banks, anywhere she might have washed up. Nothing. She was gone, taken by the river or the converted, lost either way. I wanted to keep searching, wanted to believe she'd survived, but the voices were getting closer, moving along the riverbank, systematically checking every possible location. I had no choice. I entered the forest alone. What followed were 3 days of running, hiding, barely surviving. I evaded patrols, both human and converted, slipping between search grids, moving only at night, eating plants I hoped weren't poisonous, drinking from streams that probably hosted parasites, living moment to moment with no thought beyond immediate survival. On the 4th day, I stumbled onto a logging road. On the 5th day, a truck found me, a civilian logger who radioed for help before I could warn him away. On the 6th day, I was in a hospital in Juneau, surrounded by federal agents, being debriefed on everything that had happened. I told them the truth, all of it. The research station, the converted, the conspiracy, Savannah's evidence, the bunker, everything. They listened politely, took notes, promised investigation. Then they transferred me to a psychiatric facility for observation and treatment of severe trauma-induced delusions. I've been here for 6 months now. The doctors are kind. The medication helps with the nightmares. Everyone assures me I'll recover, That what I experienced was a psychotic break brought on by stress and isolation. That my friend Colton's disappearance triggered a mental collapse that manifested as elaborate conspiracy theories. Sometimes I almost believe them. But then I see the orderly whose joints bend the wrong way when he thinks no one is watching. I notice the doctor whose eyes reflect light at night like an animal's. I catch fragments of conversation in languages that shouldn't exist, whispered in corridors I'm not supposed to access. And I know the truth hasn't set me free. It's only trapped me more completely. Savannah's files are out there somewhere, propagating through digital networks, waiting for someone to find them and believe. Until then, I sit in this comfortable prison, watching the forest through my window, counting the days until they decide what to do with me. Sometimes late at night I hear voices outside my window. Familiar voices calling my name, promising understanding, offering evolution, promising I can see Colton again, if only I open the window and step outside. The doctors say this is progress, that my delusions are becoming less threatening, more tempting. They say it means I'm healing, learning to accept reality. They're wrong. It means they're winning. I've seen storms roll across the Great Smokies, but that night the wind wasn't blowing from the sky. It was moving between the trees. Whatever pushed through the fog wasn't any animal I've logged in this region. My name is Graven Holt, and I have been the senior ranger at Tongass National Forest for 11 years. 11 years of walking through the largest temperate rainforest in North America, maintaining remote cabins, coordinating search operations, and keeping watch over nearly 17 million acres of Alaskan wilderness. 11 years of telling myself that the old Tlingit warnings were just stories, that the disappearances had reasonable explanations, that the sounds echoing through the moss-draped valleys were nothing more than wind and wildlife. I was wrong about everything. But let me start at the beginning, or at least the beginning of the end. It was early October when things started to unravel. The tourist season had wound down to almost nothing, which meant fewer float planes bringing hikers into the backcountry and more silence settling over the forest like a shroud. The autumn rains had started early that year, turning the already wet forest into something primordial. Everything dripped, everything rotted, everything felt ancient and alive in ways that made my skin crawl. The morning started like any other. I woke at 5 in my cabin at the Ketchikan Ranger Station, brewed coffee thick enough to stand a spoon in, and checked the radio logs. Nothing unusual overnight. No distress signals, no wildlife incidents, no missing hikers. Just another quiet night in Tongass. I should have recognized that silence for the warning it was. In my experience, when a forest this vast goes quiet, something is wrong. I was halfway through my second cup when the satellite phone rang. The landline almost never rang anymore, not with cell service being non-existent out here and most communication happening over radio. I picked it up, already feeling tension creep into my shoulders. "Graven, you there?" It was Elias Thornwood, one of my junior rangers stationed at the Misty Fjords outpost. Elias had been with Tongass for 2 years, transferred up from Oregon. He was competent, careful, the kind of ranger who actually followed protocol. His voice sounded strained, which immediately set off alarm bells. Elias never got rattled. "Yeah, I'm here. What's going on?" Static crackled on the line, mixed with what sounded like heavy breathing. "You need to get to the Cascade Creek Trail Junction, the north access point, right now." "What happened?" Long pause. "Just get here. And Graven, bring the trauma kit. The big one." My stomach dropped. In ranger terminology, that meant someone was seriously hurt or worse. I grabbed my gear, threw it in my truck, and started the drive. Cascade Creek was about 40 minutes from the main station, deep enough into Tongass that even the logging roads barely reached it. The route there wound through some of the densest rainforest in the region, where Sitka spruce and western hemlock grew so thick the canopy blocked out most daylight, even at noon. The forest felt wrong that morning. I had spent over a decade walking these woods, and I knew when something was off. The usual sounds were absent. No ravens calling, no squirrels chattering, no eagles screaming overhead. Just silence, oppressive and complete, broken only by the constant drip of water from the moss-covered branches. I reached the junction in 38 minutes, pushing my truck harder than I should have on the slick roads. Elias's ranger vehicle sat at an angle across the trail entrance, lights still flashing red and blue against the green twilight of the forest. Elias himself stood about 20 yards down the trail, his back to me, completely motionless. Even from a distance, I could see he was shaking. "Elias," I called out, climbing from my truck with the trauma kit. "What have we got?" He didn't turn around, just raised one hand and pointed deeper into the forest. "About 200 yards in. You'll know it when you see it." Something about his tone made me hesitate. "Are they alive?" Elias finally turned to face me. His face had gone pale as fog, and his eyes had that hollow look I had seen before on combat veterans. People who had witnessed something that fundamentally altered their understanding of reality. "No," he said quietly. "Nobody survives that." Cold dread settled into my bones, but I forced myself forward. Elias fell into step beside me, though he kept his distance, as if proximity to whatever lay ahead might somehow contaminate him again. We walked in silence, except for the squelch of our boots in the mud and the endless dripping of the rainforest. The trees here grew massive and old, their trunks thick with moss, their branches forming a canopy so dense it felt like walking through a cave made of living wood. We had gone maybe 150 yards when I smelled it. That smell. Anyone who has found a body in the wilderness knows it. Sweet and putrid and fundamentally wrong. The kind of smell that gets into your sinuses and stays there for days. But this was worse. This was that death smell amplified and mixed with something else. Something chemical, like burning copper and rotting kelp. Elias stopped walking. "Just ahead," he said, "past that fallen hemlock." He pointed but made no move forward. "I'll wait here." I wanted to tell him to come with me, but the look in his eyes told me he had already seen more than enough. I nodded and continued alone, gripping the trauma kit even though I knew it would be useless. When I rounded the massive fallen tree, I understood why Elias looked so broken. The body hung suspended between two towering spruce trees, about 8 feet off the ground. Female, mid-20s, wearing hiking gear that had been shredded to ribbons. But the hanging was not what stopped my breath. It was everything else. The body had been opened from throat to pelvis, organs removed and arranged on the forest floor below in a precise circular pattern. Within that circle, symbols had been drawn using blood and what looked like crushed charcoal. The victim's eyes were gone, the sockets dark and empty. Her mouth hung open in a silent scream that would echo in my nightmares forever. But the worst detail, the thing that made my hands shake as I raised my camera, were the marks on the tree trunks. Deep parallel gouges running down the bark, each one about 8 inches long and carved deep enough to expose the pale wood beneath the moss. 7 parallel lines. Whatever made those marks had incredible strength and claws like nothing I had ever documented in 11 years of wildlife management. I forced myself closer, documenting everything even though every instinct screamed at me to run. The arrangement of organs was deliberate, almost ritualistic. The symbols drawn in blood were intricate, clearly made with purpose and care. This was not the work of a bear or wolf. This was not even the work of a typical human killer. This was something else entirely. I pulled out my radio with trembling hands. "Elias, did you touch anything?" "No." His voice crackled back immediately. "Saw it and called you straight away. Didn't get within 15 feet. Good." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to call this in. State troopers, maybe FBI. This is beyond our jurisdiction." There was a long pause. "Graven," he said finally, "look at the ground around the trees." I did. At first I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then my eyes adjusted to the dim forest light, and I saw them. Tracks. Dozens of tracks pressed deep into the wet moss and mud, forming a circular pattern around the suspended body. But they were wrong. Too large, too deep, with 7 distinct toe impressions that were elongated in a way no human foot should be. And they were everywhere, as if whatever made them had been circling the victim for hours. I felt my breath catch. "Elias," I said carefully. "How long have you been here?" "About an hour. I was doing the dawn patrol when I found it." "And you didn't see or hear anything else?" "No movement, no sounds, nothing. Dead silent, just like now." He was right. The rainforest around us was utterly still. No wind moving through the canopy, no animals, no birds. Just us and the body and those impossible tracks. I forced myself to take photographs, to document the scene properly, because when I filed this report, nobody would believe it without evidence. I was finishing the photographs when I heard it, a sound from deeper in the forest, not loud, but distinct in the oppressive silence. A low, rhythmic clicking, like wood striking wood, but organic somehow. It echoed through the trees for maybe 20 seconds, then stopped as abruptly as it started. "Elias," I said quietly, "tell me you heard that." "I heard it," he replied, and I could hear the fear in his voice. The clicking started again, closer this time. Then it faded, moving away from us toward the north, toward the deeper wilderness where even the logging roads didn't reach. "We need to go," I said, "right now." We backed away from the scene, keeping our eyes on the surrounding forest, and made it to our vehicles without incident. Once there, I got on the satellite phone and called the Alaska State Troopers office in Ketchikan. I gave them our coordinates and told them we had found a body. When they asked for details, I hesitated. How do you explain what we had just seen? How do you describe organs arranged in geometric patterns and tracks that shouldn't exist? In the end, I kept it simple. Suspicious death, possible homicide, need immediate response. They said they would send investigators on the next available float plane, probably within 3 hours given the weather. Elias leaned against his vehicle, still pale. "What the hell was that, Graven?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But it happened in my forest. On my watch." We waited in tense silence for the troopers to arrive. I spent the time trying to make sense of what we had seen, but every logical explanation crumbled under scrutiny. Bears didn't arrange organs. Human killers didn't leave 7-toed tracks. And that clicking sound, I had no framework for understanding that at all. Trooper Sarah Vance arrived first via float plane, landing on a nearby inlet and hiking in with 2 other investigators. I had worked with Sarah before on various incidents in Tongass. Missing kayakers, hunting accidents, the occasional crime. But I could tell from her expression as I briefed her that this was different. "Show us," she said, her hand resting on her sidearm. I led them down the trail, with Elias staying behind this time. He had seen enough for one day. As we approached the site, I saw Vance's nose wrinkle at the smell. One of the other investigators actually gagged. When we rounded the fallen hemlock and they saw the body, all 3 of them stopped dead. "Sweet Jesus," Vance breathed. "What did this? I wish I knew." The investigators immediately began documenting everything, but I could see they were as disturbed as we were. This wasn't something you encountered even in major cities. This was something else entirely, something beyond normal human evil. Vance pulled me aside after about an hour. "Graven," she said quietly, "those tracks. You've been working Tongass for what, 11 years? 11 years. In those 11 years, have you ever seen tracks like that?" I shook my head. Never. Nothing in my wildlife database matches those. Nothing even comes close. She looked back at the scene, her jaw tight. "We're going to need to bring in specialists. Maybe a forensic anthropologist. Someone who understands ritualistic killings. Because this," she gestured at the suspended body, "this is ritual. This is ceremony. This is someone or something that knows exactly what it's doing." We stood there for a moment, both of us struggling with the implications. Finally, I asked, "Do you think it's still out here?" Vance's expression darkened. "Those tracks are fresh. The body is maybe 12 hours old based on decomposition. Whatever did this was here recently. And Graven, I've been a trooper for 16 years. I've seen a lot of horrible things, but I've never seen anything that suggests this level of predatory intelligence combined with this kind of physical capability. If it's still in Tongass, we have a serious problem." The forensics team worked until late afternoon, collecting samples and taking measurements. They removed the body carefully, documenting every detail. The symbols on the ground were photographed and analyzed. The tracks were cast in plaster. But I could tell from the looks on their faces that nobody had any real answers. As the sun started to set behind the dense canopy, Vance approached me again. "We've identified the victim," she said. Her name was Miranda Castellano, 26 years old, from Seattle. She was reported missing 4 days ago. Her boyfriend said she was doing a solo backpacking trip through Tongass and was supposed to check in via satellite messenger every evening. She stopped responding 3 days ago. 4 days, I repeated. She was hanging there for 4 days? Vance nodded grimly. At minimum, the coroner will confirm, but yes, she's been dead for days. And nobody saw anything? Nobody heard anything? Not that we know of. The boyfriend filed a missing persons report when she didn't check in, but we didn't have much to go on. Tongass is massive. We can't search every square mile. Miranda Castellano. I tried to imagine her alive, excited about her backpacking adventure, completely unaware of what waited for her in these ancient woods. Did she see it coming? Did she have time to be afraid? Or was death mercifully swift? Graven, Vance said, pulling me from my dark thoughts. I need you to close the northern access trails. Cascade Creek, Rainforest Loop, all of them. Tell people it's for bear activity or trail maintenance. I don't want anyone else out here until we understand what we're dealing with. I'll take care of it, I said. But Sarah, what if this wasn't a one-time thing? What if whatever did this is still hunting? Her expression grew even darker. Then we have a predator in Tongass that we've never documented before, and we have no idea how to find it or stop it. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my cabin with every light on, my service weapon on the table, listening to the sounds of the rainforest. Normally, Tongass at night was full of noise. The constant rain, branches creaking, animals moving through the undergrowth, the distant calls of owls and the screams of ravens at dawn. But that night was different. The silence from the morning had followed me home. It pressed against the windows like something alive, waiting. Around midnight, I heard it again, that rhythmic clicking, distant but clear, coming from somewhere north of the ranger station. Click, click, click. Like bones striking wood, resonating through the wet forest. I grabbed my flashlight and went to the window, peering into the darkness. Nothing, just trees and fog and that persistent sound. I picked up my radio. Elias, you awake? His response came back immediately, strained. Yeah, you hearing that? The clicking? Yeah, what is it? I don't know. But it's closer than it was this morning. We stayed on the radio, listening to that sound until it finally stopped about 15 minutes later. After that, the silence felt even more oppressive. Elias suggested we go investigate, but I refused. Whatever was making that sound, we didn't want to meet it in the dark. The next morning, I posted closure signs on all the northern trails, closed due to bear activity. I hated lying to visitors, but Vance was right. We couldn't have civilians wandering around while something dangerous was loose in Tongass. I spent the day patrolling the accessible areas, watching for anything unusual, but the forest seemed normal. Almost aggressively normal, as if trying to convince me that yesterday hadn't happened. But it had happened. Miranda Castellano was dead. The evidence was undeniable, and somewhere in these 17 million acres, something was lurking. Something that killed with ritualistic precision and left tracks that shouldn't exist. 5 days passed without incident. The state troopers continued their investigation, but I could tell they were hitting walls. There was no physical evidence pointing to a human perpetrator. No DNA, no fingerprints, nothing. Just those impossible tracks and the ritualistic nature of the killing. Some investigators started floating theories, cult activity, a serial killer with elaborate staging, but none of them could explain the tracks. On the 6th day, Elias found something. He was checking the perimeter of the closed area when he noticed fresh marks on a massive Sitka spruce near the Rainforest Loop Trail. Claw marks, just like the ones at the Miranda Castellano scene. 7 deep gouges in the bark, fresh enough that sap still oozed from the cuts. I drove out immediately. When I saw the marks, I felt that same cold dread. These weren't old marks we had missed. Something had made these in the past few days, which meant it was still here. Still active, still in Tongass. I photographed the marks and called Vance. She sent investigators, but we all knew what they would find. The same measurements, the same impossible strength required to gouge bark that deep. Whatever did this was marking its territory, and its territory was my forest. That night, Elias came to stay at my cabin. Neither of us wanted to be alone. We sat at my kitchen table, drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago, trying to make sense of everything. Elias had been researching, diving into historical records and old newspaper archives. There have been stories, he said, pulling out a folder of documents he had printed. Going back over a century, maybe longer. Disappearances in Tongass, bodies found in strange conditions. Most were written off as bear attacks or accidents, but the descriptions, he pushed papers toward me. They match what we found. I read through them. A prospector in 1897 found with massive claw wounds and organs removed. A logger in 1934 discovered suspended between trees with symbols carved around him. A fishing guide in 1978 killed and arranged in what investigators called a ceremonial pattern. All in Tongass, all unsolved. Why didn't I know about these? I asked. Elias shrugged. Before your time, mostly, and nobody connected them. They were treated as separate incidents spanning decades. Random attacks or human killers. But Graven, if you look at the pattern, something has been hunting in Tongass for over 100 years. Probably longer. 100 years. That meant, whatever this was, it had been here longer than the United States had owned Alaska. Longer than most European settlement. It wasn't a recent arrival. It was established. This was its home. We need to understand what it is, Elias said. Not just that it exists, but what it actually is. Because if we know what it is, maybe we can predict its behavior. Maybe we can protect people. Over the next few days, we dug deeper. Elias went through more archives, more missing persons reports, anything connected to Tongass. I started talking to the old-timers in the area, people who had lived near the forest their whole lives, native elders who might know the traditional stories. What I learned made my blood run cold. The forest had always had a reputation. The Tlingit people who had lived here for thousands of years had stories about something in the deep woods, something that watched, something that hunted. They had different names for it depending on the clan, but the meaning was always similar. The one who walks with 7 toes, the shadow that clicks, the thing between breath and death. One elder I spoke with, a woman named Margaret Cadishan, who had to be in her 80s, told me something that haunted me. When I was young, she said, my grandmother warned me never to go deep into Tongass alone. She said something lived there, something old, older than the trees, older than the glaciers. She said it had been here since the world was new, and it would be here when the world ended. She called it Kate Shagun, the spirit that takes. What does it want? I asked. Margaret looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. It doesn't want anything. It just is. Like the tide, like the wind. It hunts because that's what it does. That's what it's always done. My grandmother said the old ones made agreements with it, gave it territory, left it offerings. In return, it limited its hunting, took only those who wandered too deep or ignored the warnings. So people have known about this for generations? Not just known, accepted, managed. Because you can't kill a spirit, she said. You can only respect it, give it space, hope it leaves you alone. I left Margaret's house feeling sick. This had been going on for centuries. People had been dying in Tongass all that time, and it was just accepted. Part of some ancient agreement between humans and whatever lived in the deep forest. A week after finding Miranda Castellano, we got another missing person report. A man named David Chen, 34 years old, had gone kayaking along one of the coastal inlets. He told his wife he would be back by evening to their campsite on the beach. He never returned. I felt dread settle into my stomach. This was exactly what I had feared. Despite the closures, despite the warnings, people were still coming to Tongass. And now another person was missing. I mobilized search and rescue teams, contacted the Coast Guard. We had to find David Chen before he ended up like Miranda Castellano. The search lasted 4 days. We covered every inlet, every beach, calling his name until our voices gave out. We used boats, helicopters, tracking dogs, everything we had. But Tongass is vast, and the coastline is hundreds of miles of convoluted fjords and islands. There were countless places a person could vanish. Then Elias found something. Not David Chen. Something else. He radioed me to come to a small cove about 3 miles north of the main ranger station. When I arrived by boat, I saw what he had found, and my stomach dropped. Another circle, another arrangement. But this time, there was no body, just blood. Fresh blood soaking into the sand and gravel of the beach in a perfect circle. Within the circle were those same symbols, drawn with what looked like charcoal and ash. And leading away from the circle, into the dense shoreline forest, were tracks. Those same 7-toed tracks, pressed deep into the wet sand. He was here, Elias said, his voice shaking. Whatever took Miranda, it has David Chen now. I looked at the symbols, at the blood, at the massive Sitka spruce trees that crowded right up to the water's edge. More claw marks on the bark, fresh ones, And then I noticed something else. A pattern to the marks. They led north, deeper into the forest, toward the most remote section of Tongass, toward areas where even experienced rangers rarely ventured. It's taking them there, I said. The deep forest. That's its core territory. That's where it lives. Elias looked at me. What do we do? We follow the trail, I said, even though everything in me screamed not to. We find David and we document this thing. We're not equipped for this, Elias protested. We're rangers, not soldiers. We should call in the troopers, maybe federal wildlife agents. By the time they organize and get here, David could be dead, if he isn't already. I checked my weapon. We have GPS, we have radios, we have weapons, and we know this forest better than anyone. If there's a chance to save him, we have to take it. Elias was silent for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, but Graven, if we find this thing, what then? Do we really think bullets will stop it? I didn't have an answer for that. Truth was, I had no idea what we were dealing with. But I knew one thing. This was my forest, my responsibility. If people were dying in Tongass, it was on me to do something about it. We followed the tracks into the forest. They led us through terrain I had never explored, paths that weren't on any map. The trees here grew different, more twisted, more ancient. The moss hung in thick curtains from every branch, and the ground squelched with every step, threatening to swallow our boots. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, nothing but the drip of water and our own breathing. We had been walking for maybe 3 hours when Elias grabbed my arm. Listen, he whispered. I stopped. At first, I heard nothing. Then faintly, I heard it. Moaning. Weak, pained moaning coming from somewhere ahead. David. We moved faster, pushing through the undergrowth. The moaning got louder. We burst through a wall of Devil's Club and found ourselves in a small clearing surrounded by ancient hemlocks. And there he was, David Chen, alive, but barely. He was bound to a massive tree stump with some kind of woven rope made from cedar bark, his clothes torn and bloodied. His face was a mask of terror and pain. When he saw us, his eyes went wide. Please, he gasped, please help me. It's coming back. It keeps coming back. Elias rushed forward to cut the ropes while I kept watch, weapon drawn. What's coming back, David? Where is it? I don't know what it was, he sobbed as the ropes fell away. It wasn't human. It wasn't an animal. It was something wrong, something that shouldn't exist. It took me from my kayak 3 days ago, just lifted me out of the water like I weighed nothing. It's been keeping me here, coming back every few hours, making those sounds, drawing those symbols. The clicking sounds? David nodded frantically, and other sounds, words but not words, like it's trying to talk but doesn't have the right mouth for it. The ropes came free, and Elias helped David stand. He was weak, barely able to walk. How long has it been gone? I don't know, David said. Maybe an hour, maybe less. It always comes back. We need to move, I said. Now. But as I said it, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Movement in the trees around us. Fast movement. Too fast for something that size. And then that sound. That rhythmic clicking, but louder now. Much louder. Coming from multiple directions at once. It's here, David whimpered. Oh God, it's here. The three of us backed into the center of the clearing, forming a protective circle with David in the middle. I raised my weapon, scanning the dense undergrowth. Elias did the same. The clicking continued, circling us, staying just out of sight in the thick vegetation. Then, slowly, it emerged from the forest. I will remember that moment until the day I die. The moment I finally saw what had been killing people in Tongass. The moment I understood that everything I thought I knew about the natural world was incomplete. It was massive, at least 8 feet tall when it stood fully upright. Its body was humanoid, but elongated, stretched in proportions that were fundamentally wrong. The skin was dark, almost black, but with a texture like wet bark covered in moss and lichen. Its arms were too long, reaching almost to its knees, ending in hands with 7 fingers each. Those fingers ended in claws that looked like they had been carved from volcanic glass, black and sharp and deadly. Its legs were powerful, digitigrade like a deer's, but scaled up to nightmare proportions. 7 toes on each foot, each one tipped with the same black claws. The legs bent at angles that shouldn't be anatomically possible, giving it a strange, fluid gait. But the face, The face was what destroyed any remaining grip I had on rational thought. It had no eyes, just smooth skin where eyes should be, covered in the same moss-like growth. Its nose was barely more than slits in the bark skin, and its mouth. When it opened its mouth, I saw rows of teeth like broken obsidian shards, jagged and irregular, set in gums that were too dark to be flesh. It tilted its head at us, and even without eyes, I knew it was studying us, assessing, deciding. Then it made that clicking sound again, but this time I could see how. It was striking its claws together in a specific rhythm, creating that bone-on-wood resonance that had been haunting our nights. And then it spoke. Not with words exactly, but with sounds that my brain tried desperately to interpret as language. Low-frequency vibrations mixed with clicks and what might have been whistles. The sounds seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my chest, making my ribs vibrate. "What the hell is that?" Elias breathed, his voice barely audible. The creature tilted its head the other way, and I realized it was responding to sound. It had no eyes because it didn't need them. It could hear. It could sense us through vibration and sound in ways we couldn't comprehend. I made a split-second decision. I fired. 3 shots, center mass. The creature jerked backward, dark fluid spurting from the wounds. The fluid was almost black, with a consistency between sap and blood. But it didn't fall, didn't even slow down. It just looked down at the wounds with what might have been curiosity, then looked back at us. And then it smiled. Those obsidian teeth arranged themselves into something approximating a human smile, and I understood with perfect clarity that we had just made it angry. "Run!" I shouted. We ran. Elias half carrying David, me bringing up the rear, firing shots back at the creature as we went. It followed, moving through the dense forest with impossible speed and grace, never making a sound except for that terrible clicking. I could hear it behind us, gaining ground, getting closer. We burst out of the thick undergrowth onto what might have been an old game trail. "The ranger station," I gasped. "We make it to the station. We can fortify, call for help." "How far?" Elias panted. "Mile. Maybe less. Keep moving." We ran harder than I had ever run. My lungs burned, my legs screamed. David was flagging, barely conscious, but Elias kept him moving. Behind us I could hear the creature crashing through the forest, no longer bothering with stealth. It was hunting now, really hunting. The ranger station came into view through the trees, a small, solid building built in the 1960s, constructed to withstand brutal Alaskan winters. We practically fell through the door. Elias slammed it shut and I locked it. Then we dragged furniture against every opening. "Windows," Elias said. "Cover the windows." We moved through the small building, pulling everything we could against the few windows and the back door. The structure was solid, built with thick walls and minimal entry points. It was designed to keep out weather and wildlife. I prayed it could keep out this. David had collapsed in the corner, shaking violently with shock. Elias was on the radio, calling for emergency extraction. "All units, this is Ranger Thornwood. We have an emergency at the northern outpost station. We are under attack. Repeat, under attack. Need immediate helicopter extraction." The response was garbled with static, but I heard Vance's voice. "Under attack by what?" Before Elias could answer, we heard it. That clicking. But slower now, methodical. The whole building seemed to vibrate with each click. Then, silence. In that silence, we heard scratching. Slow, deliberate scratching on the outside walls. It was testing the building, looking for weaknesses, trying to understand our fortress. I gripped my weapon, knowing it had done nothing before but feeling helpless without it. The scratching stopped. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, impossibly, a voice, not the clicking speech from before, an actual voice, speaking English, speaking with my exact accent and inflection. "Graven Holt," it said from outside. "You cannot hide in there forever." I felt ice flood my veins. Elias stared at me. "That's your voice," he whispered. "Graven Holt," it repeated. "This forest is mine, has been mine for 10,000 years. You are the intruder. You and your buildings and your trails. Open the door." "How does it know my name?" I asked, my voice shaking. "It knows everything," David croaked from the corner. "It knows language. It knows thoughts. I've been listening to it for days. It's old, Graven. So old. And it's not just an animal. It thinks. It understands." This is Kate Shagun territory, the creature continued, still using my voice. The old ones knew. They respected the boundaries. They gave offerings. They stayed away from the deep forest. But you cut your trails. You built your stations. You brought your tourists. You broke the old agreements. I didn't know, I said, not sure if it could hear me. Nobody told us. Laughter. My own laughter, echoing from outside. Ignorance is not innocence. The forest remembers. I remember. Every person who has died here. Every hunter. Every hiker. Every prospector who thought these trees were his to take. I remember them all. Soon, I will remember you too. Then impact. The creature threw itself against the door. The metal hinges groaned, but held. It hit the door again, and again. Methodical. Testing. Elias was back on the radio. We need extraction now. It's trying to get in. It's going to breach. Help is coming. Vance's voice came through the static. Helicopter is en route. 20 minutes. Can you hold for 20 minutes? I looked at the door, at the furniture piled against it, at the windows we had barricaded. 20 minutes suddenly felt like an eternity. We'll try. The impacts continued. Regular, measured. Like the creature was conducting an experiment, learning the structural weaknesses of our building. Then it stopped. More silence. We waited, weapons trained on the door, barely breathing. Glass shattered. The back window. We had barricaded it, but apparently not well enough. I heard furniture being moved, pushed aside by incredible strength. It was in. It had found a way into the building. Bathroom, I hissed. Move. We scrambled to the small bathroom at the back of the station, the only room with a solid door and no windows. We crammed inside, Elias and I facing the door with our weapons raised, David huddled in the shower behind us. From outside the bathroom, we heard movement. Slow, deliberate footsteps. It was searching the building, room by room. I heard papers rustling, equipment being knocked over, then footsteps approaching our door. I can smell you, it said, still using my voice. Smell your fear. Smell your blood. The smell makes the meat sweeter. Elias's hands were shaking. His finger was tight on the trigger. I was terrified too, more afraid than I had ever been in my life. This was beyond anything we were trained for. You cannot win, Gravenholt, the creature continued. This forest has been mine since before your ancestors crossed the ice bridge. I was here when the glaciers carved these valleys. I will be here when the glaciers return. You are temporary. Brief. Insignificant. Just food for the old forest. Then, almost gently, but I will remember you. I remember all of them. Every hunter, every hiker. I keep their voices, their memories. Soon, I will have yours. You will live on in me, Gravenholt, forever. The door handle rattled. We both tensed, fingers on triggers. But the door didn't open. Instead, that clicking again, right outside. So loud it felt like my skull was vibrating. Then, incredibly, we heard it. The distinctive thump of helicopter rotors in the distance. The clicking stopped. A moment of total silence. Then the creature spoke one last time. The forest remembers Gravenholt, and the forest does not forgive trespass. You have seen me now. You know what lives in the deep places. That knowledge comes with a cost. Footsteps moving away. Glass breaking again as it exited through the window. By the time we worked up the courage to open the bathroom door, it was gone. The station was empty except for the destruction, and carved deep into the wooden wall, fresh enough that sap still dripped from the cuts, were more of those symbols, the same ones we had seen at the crime scenes. The helicopter landed in a small clearing near the station 5 minutes later. State troopers poured out, weapons ready, but there was nothing to shoot. Vance found us still in the bathroom, shaking, unable to speak coherently. David was in shock. Elias was pale as death. And I couldn't stop staring at those symbols on the wall. We were evacuated immediately. David was taken to a hospital in Juneau. Elias and I were debriefed for hours, telling our story over and over. I could see in Vance's eyes that she wanted to dismiss it as trauma-induced delusion. But the evidence was there. The broken window, the carved symbols, the massive 7-toed tracks in the mud outside. Most damning of all, when forensics examined the station, they found that black fluid, the substance I had shot from the creature. They ran tests. It wasn't blood, wasn't from any known animal. The molecular structure was bizarre, like plant cellulose and animal protein somehow fused at a cellular level. As one lab technician told me later, this violates everything we know about biology. This shouldn't exist, but it does. David Chen recovered physically, but he never set foot in Alaska again. Last I heard, he moved to Arizona, as far from temperate rainforest as possible. Elias requested a transfer and is now working at a national park in Utah. I don't blame him. Some things, once seen, can never be unseen. As for me, I stayed. Someone had to. Someone needed to keep watch over Tongass, to maintain the boundaries, to make sure people understood the warnings. It was my forest, my responsibility. That hadn't changed, even if everything else had. The weeks following the attack were a bureaucratic nightmare. Vance wanted to close the entire northern section of Tongass permanently, not temporarily, forever. It took meetings with federal officials, environmental assessments, native consultations, but eventually it happened. The northern section, over 2 million acres of the deepest, oldest forest in Tongass, was permanently closed to public access. Armed rangers were posted at all entry points. Warning signs were erected in multiple languages. The official explanation was environmental protection, sensitive habitat, endangered species. We didn't mention Kayet Shagun. That truth was too dangerous. It would cause either panic or, worse, curiosity. People might try to enter the restricted zone just to see if the stories were true. But those of us who knew, we carried that truth. Vance knew. The troopers who responded knew. The lab technicians who analyzed that impossible fluid knew. And the local native communities knew, because they had always known. Their ancestors had made agreements with the thing in the deep forest, had learned to respect its territory, had paid the price when those agreements were broken. I spoke with Margaret Kadashian again after everything. She wasn't surprised. Told you, she said simply. The old ones knew. They left it territory, left it alone. You can't kill a spirit. You can only respect it. So what do we do now? I asked. We remember, she said. We maintain the boundaries. We warn people. We make sure the old agreements are honored again. And we hope Kayet Shagun is satisfied. Hope it returns to its old patterns, taking only those foolish enough to ignore the warnings. It wasn't a perfect solution. It meant accepting that something deadly lived in Tongass. It meant some people might still die if they ventured into the restricted zone despite all warnings. But it was better than the alternative. Better than more Miranda Castellanos, more David Chens. The closures have been in effect for 3 months now. There have been no more killings in the accessible areas of Tongass. The creature seems to have retreated to its territory, satisfied that its boundaries are being respected again. But I know it's still there. I can feel it. Most nights, I sit in my cabin and listen to the sounds of the rainforest, the constant rain, the wind through the massive trees, the calls of ravens and eagles, normal sounds. But sometimes, late at night when the fog rolls thick through the valleys, I hear it. That clicking, distant but clear. The creature moving through its domain, marking its trees, keeping its vigil. And I know it hears me too, knows I'm here. We have an understanding now, an agreement. I stay in my territory, it stays in its. And as long as those boundaries hold, maybe, just maybe, no one else has to die. But I don't fool myself. I know the truth. I know what Margaret told me. The knowledge has a cost. I have seen Kayet Shagun. I know it exists. I know it speaks with the voices of those it has taken. I know it has been in this forest for 10,000 years and will be here for 10,000 more. That knowledge has changed me. I'm not the same Graven Holt who took this job 11 years ago. That man believed the world was cataloged and understood. That nature could be managed with the right policies and procedures. That monsters were myths told to scare children. I know better now. I have seen what lives in the deep rainforest. I have heard it speak with my own voice. I have seen the symbols it carves and the patterns it creates. And I know that Tongass keeps its secrets, keeps its spirit, keeps its ancient inhabitant. The tourists who come here now, the ones who stay in the safe zones, they see a beautiful forest. They see the massive trees and the hanging moss and the pristine watersheds. They don't know what watches from the restricted areas. They don't hear the clicking in the night. They don't see the seven-toed tracks that sometimes appear near the boundary markers. And maybe that's for the best. Ignorance can be a mercy. Fear of the unknown keeps people safe. As long as they respect the closure signs, as long as they stay on the marked trails, they will never have to see what I have seen. But I will always know. Every time I patrol these woods, every time I help a lost kayaker or check a remote cabin, I will know what is out there, what has always been out there. Kate Shagun, the spirit that takes, the thing with 7 toes, the ancient predator that has been in Tongass since the Ice Age. It was here before me. It will be here after me. This is its home. We are just guests, temporary and fragile. And if we forget that, if we push into its territory again, if we break the boundaries we have reestablished, it will remind us. It will take what it believes is owed. It will arrange the bodies and draw the symbols and leave those terrible tracks in the moss. And when that happens, when someone else finds a Miranda Castellano or becomes another David Chen, they will ask the same questions I did. What happened here? What could do this? And maybe, if they are unlucky enough to push deep into the restricted zone, they will find out. Because the forest remembers, Kate Shagun remembers, and it is patient, so very patient. It has all the time in the world. It can wait decades, centuries, for humans to forget the old agreements, to ignore the warnings, to convince themselves that ancient spirits are just stories. But they aren't stories. I know this with absolute certainty because I have seen it. I have fought it. I have heard it speak with stolen voices, and I carry that knowledge like a weight that never lifts. I am Graven Holt, Senior Ranger of Tongass National Forest, and this is my testimony, my warning, my confession to what walks in these ancient woods. If you ever come to Tongass, please, stay on the marked trails. Respect the restricted zones. Do not venture into the northern sections no matter how experienced you think you are. And if you hear clicking in the forest, like bone-striking wood, do not investigate, do not follow it. Turn around and leave as quickly as you can. Because once you see it, once you know what is really out there, you can never unsee it. You can never unknow it. The knowledge changes you, marks you, makes you aware that something older than civilization shares this forest with us. Something that tolerates our presence only because we have learned once again to respect its domain. This is Tongass National Forest. This is my territory, given to me by law and duty, and this is where ancient things still walk, where the boundary between myth and reality is as thin as the mist that rolls through these valleys every morning. The spirit that takes is real, and it is waiting, always waiting, for the next person who ignores the warnings, for the next hiker who pushes too deep, for the next time we forget that some places were never meant for human feet. Margaret Kadashian was right. You can't kill a spirit. You can only respect it. Give it space. Hope it leaves you alone. And I do hope. Every single day, I hope the boundaries hold. Hope people heed the warnings. Hope Kate Shagun stays in its deep forest and we stay in ours. But hope is not certainty. And in the quiet moments, when the fog is thick and the clicking echoes distant through the trees, I wonder how long the peace will last, how long before someone breaks the boundary again, how long before I find another body suspended between ancient trees, organs arranged in those terrible patterns. Because Kate Shagun is patient, and the forest, the beautiful, terrible, ancient forest, will always keep its secrets. This is my warning. This is my truth. Ignore it at your peril. The rainforest is listening. It always has been. And in the deepest shadows, something is listening with it. I found his notebook wedged in a tree trunk, pages torn like something tried to pull it away from him. That was my introduction to Allegheny National Forest. 3 days into my new posting as head ranger, and already I was standing in the pre-dawn mist holding evidence that my predecessor, Daniel Mercer, had not simply walked away from exhaustion like the official reports claimed. The notebook was leather-bound, expensive, the kind a man keeps close. But the pages were shredded, great gouges through the paper that looked almost like claw marks. And on the last intact page, written in handwriting that deteriorated from neat script to frantic scrawl, were 3 words. They are watching always. My name is Samuel Holloway, and I have been a ranger for 11 years. I worked the Adirondacks before this, peaceful mountains where the worst I dealt with were drunk campers and the occasional black bear. Allegheny was supposed to be my promotion, my reward for a decade of solid service. 500,000 acres of Pennsylvania wilderness, headquartered out of the small ranger station near Marianville. Good pay, good benefits, a cabin of my own on federal land. It seemed perfect. I should have asked more questions about why the position opened up so suddenly. Daniel Mercer had been head ranger for only 18 months when he disappeared. The official story was burnout. His wife told investigators he had been acting strange for months, paranoid and sleep-deprived, talking about sounds in the forest and things moving between the trees. They found his truck abandoned on a service road near Hart's Content, his ranger gear scattered across the front seat. No body, no blood, no signs of struggle, just an empty vehicle and a man who walked into Allegheny and never walked out. The brass called it a mental breakdown, said he probably wandered off in a fugue state, maybe fell into a ravine or succumbed to the elements. They found the notebook 2 weeks later during a routine trail check, wedged impossibly high in an oak tree trunk, 8 feet off the ground. Nobody could explain how it got there. They added it to his file and closed the case. But they did not read the notebook carefully. They did not see what I saw on that cold October morning, standing on the trail with mist curling around my boots. They did not see the symbols sketched in the margins, crude drawings of figures that were almost human, but not quite. They did not read the increasingly desperate entries about disappearances that went back years, about patterns Daniel had started to notice, about something he called the Night Watch. I should have turned around right then, should have driven back to the regional office and requested a transfer. But I had just signed a 2-year contract, and the rational part of my brain insisted there had to be logical explanations. Daniel had been troubled. He had seen patterns that were not there. The notebook was just the ravings of a man losing his grip on reality. That rational part of my brain would not survive the next 3 weeks. I spent my first few days getting oriented. The Allegheny compound consisted of the main ranger station, a equipment shed, and 3 small cabins for staff. Currently, the staff was just me and 2 junior rangers, Marcus Chen and Rebecca Torres. Marcus was 26, fresh out of forestry school, eager and optimistic. Rebecca was 31, former military police, with a no-nonsense attitude that I appreciated. They had both worked under Daniel, and, when I asked about him, they exchanged uncomfortable glances. He got weird near the end, Marcus said carefully. We were sitting in the station break room, coffee steaming in cheap mugs. Started doing patrols at night when he should have been home. Said he needed to watch for something. We asked what, but he would not explain. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, her expression guarded. 2 months before he vanished, we had an incident. Hikers reported finding remains on the northern trails. Animal remains, deer mostly, but they were arranged, laid out in patterns. Patterns, I repeated. What kind of patterns? Circles, Rebecca said. Bones arranged in perfect circles with symbols made from smaller bones in the center. The hikers were freaked out. We figured it was some kids playing around, maybe some kind of ritual thing. But Daniel got obsessed with it, started mapping where these bone circles appeared, looking for connections. Did he find any? They both hesitated. Then Marcus spoke quietly. He said they were markers, territory boundaries. He said something was claiming sections of the forest. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October cold. Did you believe him? Marcus looked uncomfortable. I wanted to think he was stressed, seeing things that were not there. But Rebecca and I, we have both seen some of those bone circles. They are real. And there are a lot of them, all through the northern reaches of the forest. Someone or something is making them. After that conversation, I pulled the incident reports from the past 5 years. What I found was disturbing. Allegheny National Forest averaged between 4 and 7 missing persons cases annually, most of them resolved. Hikers who wandered off trail and were found within a day or two. Hunters who got turned around and eventually made their way back to civilization. But there was a subset of cases that remained unsolved. People who entered Allegheny and simply vanished, leaving no trace. The numbers were consistent. 2 or 3 people per year, gone without explanation. The disappearances were spread across the forest, no obvious pattern to location or timing. The missing were a mix of ages and experience levels, seasoned hikers and casual tourists alike. Some vanished from popular trails, others from remote areas few people ventured into. The only commonality was that they were never found. I created a map, marking each unsolved disappearance with a pin. When I was done, I stared at the result for a long time. The pins formed a rough crescent through the northern and western sections of the forest, the same areas where the bone circles had been reported, the same areas Daniel Mercer had been obsessed with before his disappearance. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in my cabin bed listening to the forest sounds outside. Allegheny at night was alive with noise. Wind through the pines, branches creaking, the distant calls of owls, normal sounds, familiar sounds. But underneath them, I heard something else, a rhythmic quality, almost like drumming, soft and distant but persistent. I got up and went to the window, peering out into the darkness. The compound lights created pools of yellow illumination, but beyond them was only blackness, solid and impenetrable. As I watched, I saw movement at the tree line, just a flicker, there and gone. Probably a deer or a raccoon. But it made me think of Daniel's words from the notebook. They are watching always. I returned to bed, but left the lights on. The next morning, I decided to inspect the northern trails personally. Marcus offered to come along, but I declined. I needed to see these bone circles for myself, without an audience. I packed my gear, checked my radio, and headed out just after dawn. The air was crisp and clean, sunlight filtering through the canopy in golden shafts. It was beautiful, peaceful, the kind of forest that reminded you why you became a ranger in the first place. I reached the first reported site around mid-morning. It was in a small clearing about 3 miles from the nearest marked trail, accessible only by rough deer paths. And there, in the center of the clearing, was the bone circle. I stopped at the edge and stared. It was exactly as described. A perfect circle, maybe 8 feet in diameter, made from what looked like deer bones. Ribs, leg bones, vertebrae, all arranged with careful precision. In the center was a symbol made from smaller bones, finger bones maybe, formed into a shape like a star with too many points. The bones were old, bleached white by weather, but the arrangement was recent. No grass grew within the circle. The earth was bare and dark. I took photographs from multiple angles, then careful approached. As I got closer, I noticed something else. Around the outside of the bone circle were marks in the dirt. Not footprints exactly, more like shallow grooves, as if something had been dragged around the perimeter. The grooves were evenly spaced, forming their own circle around the bones. I crouched down to examine them more closely. The grooves were about 1 inch deep and 3 inches wide, smooth-sided and deliberate. Whatever made them had moved in a perfect circle, maintaining exact distance from the bones. I reached out to touch one of the grooves and immediately pulled my hand back. The dirt felt wrong. Cold beyond what the autumn temperature warranted, and slightly damp despite the dry weather we had been having. Standing up, I surveyed the clearing again. That is when I noticed the trees. Every tree surrounding the clearing had marks carved into the bark. Deep vertical gouges, 4 parallel lines, like something with claws had raked down the trunk. The marks were fresh, sap still oozing from some of them. They were positioned at roughly 7 feet off the ground, which meant whatever made them was tall. Very tall. I took more photographs, then consulted the map Daniel had included in his notes. There were 5 more bone circle locations marked, all within a 10-mile radius. I decided to check at least one more before heading back. The next nearest site was about 2 miles northeast, deeper into the forest where the trails became less maintained. The hike there was uneventful, though I could not shake the feeling of being observed. Several times I stopped and scanned the trees, certain I had seen movement in my peripheral vision. But there was nothing. Just forest. Just trees and underbrush and the chittering of squirrels. Normal. The second bone circle was larger than the first, maybe 12 feet across, but the pattern was identical. Bones arranged in a perfect circle, a symbol in the center, grooves around the outside, and claw marks on every surrounding tree. This clearing was darker, the canopy thicker overhead, and there was a smell, faint but distinct, like rotting meat and wet earth combined. I was photographing the symbol when I heard it, a sound from deeper in the woods. Not an animal sound, not a human sound, something in between. A low vocalization, almost like speech but not quite forming words. It came from the north, beyond the clearing, and it was moving. My hand went to my sidearm. Rangers in Allegheny carried weapons because of bears and the occasional aggressive wildlife. I had never drawn mine in a threatening situation, but I drew it now, thumbing off the safety, my heart hammering against my ribs. The sound came again, closer, that almost speech, rising and falling in a rhythm that felt deliberate, communicative. Then, silence. Complete and absolute. Even the normal forest sounds cut off. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just that oppressive quiet that sets your teeth on edge and makes you acutely aware of your own breathing. I backed away from the bone circle, keeping my eyes on the northern tree line. The shadows there seemed deeper than they should be, darker, almost solid. I had the overwhelming sense that something was standing just out of sight, watching me, evaluating me. I kept backing up until I hit the trail, then turned and walked quickly back toward the compound, not running. Running might trigger a chase response, but moving with purpose, my hand still on my weapon. The normal forest sounds gradually returned as I put distance between myself and the clearing. By the time I reached the compound, it was mid-afternoon and everything seemed normal again. But my hands were shaking as I unlocked the station door. Rebecca was inside, working on supply inventory. She took one look at my face and set down her clipboard. "What happened?" "I found the bone circles," I said. "And something else. I think something was watching me out there." I showed her the photographs on my camera. She studied them in silence, her expression growing increasingly grim. "These marks on the trees," she said finally. "Those are fresh, within the last few days." "I know." She looked up at me. "Sam, those gouges are 7 feet high. What kind of animal reaches that high?" I did not have an answer. We spent the rest of the day going through Daniel's notebook more carefully, cross-referencing his notes with incident reports and park records. A pattern began to emerge. The disappearances clustered around the bone circle locations, not exactly at them, but within a mile or two. And there was a temporal pattern too. The disappearances increased in autumn and winter, dropping off almost entirely in spring and summer. "Whatever this is," Rebecca said, "it has a season. It hunts when the days get shorter." We were interrupted by Marcus bursting into the station, his face flushed with exertion. "We have a situation," he said breathlessly. "Hikers just reported finding a body on Tionesta Trail. Not recent. They said it looked like it had been there for months." The three of us drove out immediately. Tionesta Trail was one of the more remote paths, winding through old-growth forest in the western section. The hikers who made the report were a young couple, white-faced and shaken, waiting at the trailhead. They led us about a mile in before stopping and pointing off the path. "We could not go any closer," the woman said, her voice trembling. "The smell was too bad." I approached carefully, Rebecca and Marcus flanking me. The smell hit me well before I saw the body. That same rot and earth combination from the bone circle clearing, but amplified, overwhelming. I pulled my shirt up over my nose and mouth and pushed through the underbrush. The body was tied to a tree, arms spread wide, secured with what looked like thick vines. It was in an advanced state of decomposition, making identification impossible without forensics. But certain things were clear. The body had been arranged deliberately. The positioning was too careful to be accidental. And carved into the tree trunk above the body were symbols. The same symbols from the bone circles. The same symbols from Daniel's notebook. "Get the sheriff out here," I said quietly, "and call the state police. This is a crime scene." The investigation that followed was intensive. The state police brought in forensic teams, cadaver dogs, the works. The body was identified as Thomas Garrett, a 52-year-old hiker from Pittsburgh who had been reported missing 7 months earlier. Cause of death could not be determined due to decomposition, but the manner of death was clearly homicide. The vines binding him to the tree had grown into his remains, suggesting he had been there for months, exposed to weather and animals. But the disturbing part was what the forensics team found when they examined the symbols. They were not carved with a knife or any tool. They were gouged into the wood with something sharp and strong, the same something that had marked the trees around the bone circles. And the pattern of the symbols matched nothing in any database. Not gang markings, not known cult iconography, nothing. The lead investigator, a state police detective named Sarah Klein, pulled me aside on the third day of the investigation. "Ranger Holloway," she said, "I need you to be straight with me. What the hell is going on in this forest?" I told her everything. Daniel Mercer's disappearance and obsessive behavior before it, the bone circles, the claw marks on trees, the pattern of disappearances going back years. I showed her Daniel's notebook and my own map of unsolved cases. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "This stays between us for now. If word gets out that we have a serial killer operating in Allegheny, we will have panic and vigilantes and a media circus. We need to handle this carefully." "You think it is a person?" I asked. She looked at me sharply. "What else would it be?" I did not answer. I could not explain the sounds I had heard, the sense of something massive moving through the forest, the sheer wrongness of those clearings. Saying it out loud would make me sound like Daniel, paranoid, delusional, seeing monsters where there were only men. But I knew better. The rational part of my brain was losing the argument. Over the next week, the state police expanded their search. They found 2 more bodies. Both had been missing for over a year. Both were found tied to trees with symbols carved above them. Both were in the same northern and western sections of the forest where the bone circles appeared. The pattern was unmistakable. Detective Klein authorized closure of the affected trails. We put up signs and barriers, told the public it was due to bear activity in hazardous conditions. The lie tasted bitter, but it kept people out of the most dangerous areas. Meanwhile, the investigation continued. Police set up trail cameras at various locations, trying to catch whoever was responsible. They interviewed locals about cult activity or suspicious individuals. They found nothing. No suspects, no leads, just 3 bodies, dozens of bone circles, and a forest that seemed to be hiding something massive and terrible. I started having nightmares. In them, I walked through Allegheny at night, following that rhythmic drumming sound. The trees around me were marked with symbols that glowed faintly in the darkness. And ahead, just beyond my flashlight beam, something walked on 2 legs but was not human. It was tall and thin, moving with a gait that was almost right but subtly wrong. In the dreams, I called out to it. It turned, and I saw its face. Then I woke up screaming. Rebecca noticed my deterioration. She started accompanying me on patrols, insisting I should not go into the forest alone. Marcus became more withdrawn, spending hours poring over maps and old records, looking for patterns we might have missed. The station took on a bunker mentality. We were under siege from something we could not see or understand. 3 weeks after finding Thomas Garrett, we got a radio call from a day hiker who had gotten turned around on one of the closed trails. He had ignored the barriers, thinking he knew the area well enough to navigate. Now he was lost and panicking, his radio transmission breaking up with static. We triangulated his approximate position, and Marcus and I headed out immediately to find him. The hiker, a middle-aged man named Robert Church, was about 4 miles into the restricted area. It took us 2 hours of hard hiking to reach his location. We found him sitting against a tree, his face pale and sweaty despite the cold. "Thank God," he gasped when he saw us. "I thought I was going to die out here." "What happened?" Marcus asked, offering him water. Robert took a long drink before answering. "I got off the trail and could not find my way back, kept walking in circles, and there was something following me. I kept hearing it, movement in the trees, but whenever I looked, there was nothing there." "Just anxiety," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "The forest can play tricks on your mind when you are lost." "No," Robert insisted. "It was real. And I saw it. Just once, maybe an hour ago. Something tall, moving between the trees about 50 yards ahead of me. It walked on 2 legs, but it was not a person. It was wrong. All wrong." Marcus and I exchanged glances. "What do you mean, wrong?" I asked carefully. "The proportions were off," Robert said. "Too tall, arms too long, and the way it moved, sort of fluid and jerky at the same time, like stop-motion animation. It looked at me for maybe 2 seconds, then just melted back into the forest. That is when I called for help. We needed to get him out of there fast. I helped Robert to his feet, and we started back toward the nearest trail, moving as quickly as his exhausted state allowed. The sun was setting, shadows lengthening between the trees, and as we walked, I felt it again, that sensation of being watched, being evaluated. The forest around us had gone quiet. No bird calls, no small animals rustling in the underbrush, just our footsteps and heavy breathing. Marcus had his hand on his weapon. I could see the tension in his shoulders. We were maybe a mile from the trailhead when we heard the sound, that low, almost speech vocalization, closer than I had ever heard it before. It came from our left, maybe 30 yards off the path, then from our right, then behind us, surrounding us. "Marcus," I said quietly, "we need to move faster." We picked up the pace, practically dragging Robert between us. The vocalizations continued, moving with us, keeping pace. I caught glimpses of movement in the trees, something large and dark, there and gone before I could focus on it. Multiple somethings. "Run," I said. We ran. Robert stumbled, and I hauled him up. The vocalizations grew louder, more agitated. I could hear branches breaking, the sound of something moving through the forest with us. Multiple somethings. My lungs burned and my legs screamed, but I kept running. Marcus ahead of us, Robert between us, something behind us getting closer. We burst out onto the trail and I saw our truck in the distance. Marcus reached it first, yanking open the doors. I pushed Robert inside and climbed in after him, slamming the door. Marcus hit the gas before I even had my seatbelt fastened. In the rearview mirror, I saw them, just for a moment, 3 figures standing at the forest edge, watching our truck speed away. They were tall, at least 7 feet. Humanoid in basic shape, but elongated, all wrong proportions, and even from a distance, I could see they were covered in something dark, not fur, not clothing, something that looked like bark or rough hide. Then we rounded a bend, and they were gone. We took Robert to the nearest hospital. He was treated for exhaustion and dehydration, but was otherwise physically fine. Mentally was another story. He kept repeating the same thing over and over. They were not human. They were not human. The doctors attributed it to trauma and exposure. I did not correct them. That night, Rebecca, Marcus, and I sat in the station and finally said out loud what we had all been thinking. This was not a serial killer. This was not a cult. This was something else. Something that lived in Allegheny National Forest. Something that had been here long before the rangers, before the Park Service, maybe before humans settled this region at all. The question was, what did we do about it? Rebecca suggested contacting wildlife experts or cryptozoologists. Marcus thought we should go public with what we had seen, force an official investigation. I was not sure. Either course risked our careers and our credibility, but keeping silent while people died seemed equally wrong. We decided to gather more evidence first, real evidence, photographs or video that could not be dismissed. We would document everything, build a case that could not be ignored. It was risky, but it seemed like our only option. Over the next week, we set up our own trail cameras in the Bone Circle areas. We did night patrols in pairs, never alone. We documented every strange occurrence, every unusual sound, every displaced bone or fresh claw mark. We were building a case against something that should not exist. Then, the disappearances started again. 3 hikers in 5 days, all experienced, all on trails they knew well. All simply vanished without a trace. Search and rescue teams combed the areas where they were last seen, but found nothing. No abandoned gear, no signs of struggle, nothing. Except, in each case, when we examined the locations privately, we found symbols, carved into trees or scratched into rocks. The same symbols from the bone circles and the bodies. The symbols from Daniel Mercer's notebook. They were marking their territory, claiming victims, and they were getting bolder. On the 7th day after the first disappearance, one of our trail cameras captured something. It was 3 a.m. The camera triggered by motion. The image showed a clearing, illuminated by infrared, and in the clearing, visible for just 2 frames, was one of them. 7 feet tall, humanoid but wrong. Its limbs were too long, jointed in too many places. Its head was elongated, no visible eyes or nose, just a mouth filled with what looked like too many teeth. Its skin, or hide, or whatever covered it, had the texture of ancient bark, and most chillingly, it was looking directly at the camera, as if it knew we were watching. Marcus enhanced the image as much as he could. When we studied the enlarged photo, we saw details that made my skin crawl. The creature's hands had 6 fingers, each tipped with a black claw. Its feet were similarly elongated, with what looked like opposable digits that would allow it to climb. And partially visible behind it, standing in the shadows at the clearing's edge, were others, at least 3 more, maybe 4, watching as the first examined our camera. They knew we were watching, and they did not care. Or worse, they wanted us to see them. Detective Klein came out when I called her about the photo. She stared at it for a long time, her expression unreadable. This is not a person, she said finally. No, I agreed. It is not. What is it? I wish I knew. She sat down heavily. The families of the missing hikers are demanding answers. The media is starting to pick up the story. I have my superiors asking why we have not found anything. And now you show me this. She gestured at the photo. What am I supposed to do with this? How do I explain that we have some kind of unknown species living in a Pennsylvania forest? You go public, I said. You show them this photo and you tell them we need help. Real help. Scientists, military, whatever it takes. And if they think I am crazy, if they think you doctored this photo, then more people will die, I said flatly. Because whatever these things are, they are not stopping. They are escalating. Klein was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded. Okay, I will take this up the chain. But Ranger Holloway, you need to understand something. If this goes public, Allegheny will be shut down completely. No access for anyone. They will cordon off 500,000 acres and maybe burn it to the ground. I know, I said. But at this point, I think that might be the kindest option. Before Klein could take the photo to her superiors, everything changed. It was 3 days later, early evening. Rebecca and I were doing a final patrol before sunset when we got a radio call from Marcus. His voice was shaking. You need to get back to the station, right now. We have a visitor. What kind of visitor? Just get here. We rushed back. When we arrived, we found Marcus standing outside the station, his face pale. Inside, he said. It is inside the station. Rebecca and I drew our weapons and approached cautiously. Through the window, I could see movement, something large standing in the main office. My hand shook as I reached for the door handle. The creature turned when we entered. It was one of them. 7 feet of elongated horror standing in the middle of our station like it owned the place. But it was not attacking. It was just standing there, waiting. And then it spoke. Not in English, not in any language I recognized, but it spoke. The sounds formed patterns, repetitions, something that was clearly communication even if we could not understand it. It gestured with those 6-fingered hands, pointing at the wall where we had pinned Daniel Mercer's map. Then it pointed at us, then at the door. The message was clear. It wanted us to follow it. Rebecca and I looked at each other. This was insane. Following one of these creatures deeper into the forest was suicidal, but it was also the first attempt at communication, the first chance to understand what we were dealing with. Against every survival instinct, I nodded. Okay. We will follow you. The creature turned and walked out the door with that fluid, jerky gait Robert Church had described. It moved across the compound and into the forest, not looking back. We followed at a distance, our weapons ready but not raised. Marcus stayed behind to monitor our radios and call for help if we did not return. The creature led us deep into the restricted section, to areas I had never explored. The sun was setting, shadows lengthening. We walked for maybe 30 minutes, winding through dense forest until we reached a clearing I did not recognize. It was massive, easily 100 feet across, and it was full of them. Dozens of the creatures, standing in concentric circles around something in the center. When we entered the clearing, they all turned to look at us. I felt my heart stop, but they did not attack. They parted, creating a path to the center of the clearing. Our guide gestured for us to follow. At the center, we found Daniel Mercer. He was alive, barely, tied to a stake with those thick vines, his clothes in tatters, his body emaciated, but alive. His eyes focused on us, and I saw recognition, fear, and something else, knowledge. The creatures around us began that vocalization, all of them at once, creating a sound that vibrated in my chest. It was not threatening, it was almost ceremonial, and then, impossibly, Daniel spoke. His voice was a rasp, barely audible. They have been here for thousands of years. This forest was theirs long before it was ours. The symbols, the bone circles, the carvings, they are not warnings, they are boundaries, territorial markers. We crossed them, built trails through their land, cut down their trees. They tried to warn us, but we did not listen. I stepped forward. Daniel, we are getting you out of here. He shook his head weakly. Too late for me. I broke too many rules, went too deep. Learned too much. They kept me alive to deliver a message. What message? Leave. Take your trails and your rangers and your tourists and leave. This forest is theirs. It always has been. They will allow safe passage to those who respect the boundaries, but anyone who crosses into their territory uninvited will be taken. That is the compact. That is how it has always been. The creatures around us remained still, watching, waiting. Rebecca's voice was tight. How do we know which areas are theirs? Daniel laughed, a broken sound. Look at your map. Every disappearance, every bone circle, every marked tree. The boundaries are clear. You just have to be willing to see them. The creature that led us here stepped forward. It bent down and with one claw drew a symbol in the dirt at my feet, the same symbol from the bone circles. Then it pointed at me, at Rebecca, at the forest around us. The message was clear. Remember, respect, leave. Then, with movements too fast to follow, the creatures vanished into the forest. All of them. In seconds, the clearing was empty except for Daniel, Rebecca, and myself. We cut him down and carried him back to the compound. By the time we reached the station, he was unconscious. We got him to a hospital where he remained in a coma for 2 weeks before passing away. The official cause of death was exposure and organ failure. But I knew the truth. He had been kept alive just long enough to deliver their message, and that message changed everything. I presented everything to Detective Klein. The photos, the videos, Daniel's testimony before he died, the pattern of disappearances and territorial markers. She took it to her superiors, who took it to theirs. Within a month, there was a joint task force involving state police, federal agencies, and academic researchers. They wanted to capture one of the creatures for study. I argued vehemently against it. These beings, whatever they were, had offered us terms, respect their territory, and they would allow safe passage, break the compact, and face the consequences. Trying to capture one would be a declaration of war against something we did not understand and definitely could not control. In the end, cooler heads prevailed. Allegheny National Forest was officially repartitioned. The northern and western sections, roughly 200,000 acres, were declared permanently closed to public access. Official reason given was environmental protection and hazardous terrain. The truth was kept classified, known only to a small group of rangers, police, and officials. New boundaries were established, marked with symbols we copied from the creature's own markers. To the public, they looked like standard Park Service signs. But we knew what they really meant. Beyond this point, you are in their territory. Enter at your own risk. The disappearances stopped. Completely. As long as people stayed within the new boundaries, they were safe. The creatures kept to their section of the forest, and we kept to ours. An uneasy peace, built on mutual respect and fear. I remained head ranger of Allegheny for another year, but I could not shake what I had seen, what I knew. Every time I walked those trails, I felt them watching from beyond the boundaries. Evaluating, waiting, making sure we kept our end of the compact. Eventually, I requested a transfer. They gave me a position in a smaller, safer forest. Rebecca and Marcus both left within months of each other. None of us could bear the weight of that knowledge anymore. But the creatures remain. In the deep parts of Allegheny, in the sections now marked as forbidden, they continue their ancient existence, arranging bones, marking trees, keeping watch over a forest that was theirs long before we arrived. I still have Daniel Mercer's notebook. Sometimes I flip through it, reading his increasingly desperate entries. On the final page, below the words, "They are watching always," he wrote something else, something I did not notice initially. We are the intruders. We always were. He was right. Allegheny National Forest does not belong to us. It never did. We are just guests, tolerated as long as we remember our place, as long as we respect the boundaries, as long as we understand that some places were never meant for human feet. The compact holds, for now. But I wonder how long it will last, how long before someone ignores the warnings and crosses those boundaries, how long before the creatures decide that even the territory we still occupy is too much. I do not sleep well anymore. When I close my eyes, I see them standing in that clearing, dozens of impossible figures watching me with faces that have no eyes. I hear that vocalization, that almost speech that might be their language or might be something else entirely. And I remember Daniel's words. This forest is theirs. It always has been. He was right. And that truth is more terrifying than any monster. Because it means that all our national forests, all our protected wilderness areas, all the wild places we think we control, they might not be ours at all. They might belong to things we do not understand. things that have been here longer than us, things that tolerate our presence only as long as we stay in our designated spaces. And if we ever forget that, if we ever become too arrogant, too confident in our dominance over nature, they will remind us, they will take people, they will mark boundaries, they will make their presence known. The wilderness is not empty, it never was. And the things that live there, the things that have always lived there, they are patient, they are watching, they are waiting. Remember that, if you ever visit Allegheny, stay on the marked trails, respect the closed areas. Do not venture past the boundaries. Because beyond those lines, beyond those symbols we pretend are just Park Service markers, there are things older than civilization, things that have their own rules, their own justice. And if you break their rules, no one can save you. Not the rangers, not the police, not anyone. You will simply disappear into the forest. And months later, someone will find your body tied to a tree, symbols carved above your head, your remains arranged in patterns that mean something to creatures we will never fully understand. That is the compact. That is the price of trespassing. That is the truth of Allegheny National Forest. And now you know it too. I didn't believe in local legends until I saw the silhouette by the river at dusk. 10 seconds later, the area smelled like metal, and my radio cut out mid-word. My name is Rowan Black, and I have been the head ranger of Sequoia National Forest for 12 years. 12 years of walking trails that cut through some of the oldest living things on Earth. Trees that have stood for thousands of years, witnessing things no human should ever see. 12 years of telling myself that the disappearances had logical explanations, that the sounds in the night were just the forest settling, that the stories whispered by locals were nothing more than campfire tales meant to scare tourists. I was wrong about everything. It started on a Wednesday in late October when the morning fog rolled in thicker than I had ever seen it, the kind of fog that turns the massive sequoia trunks into ghostly sentinels, that muffles sound until you feel like you are walking through cotton. I was on my usual morning patrol of the giant forest area when I found the backpack. It was sitting in the middle of the trail, perfectly upright, as if someone had carefully placed it there. No signs of struggle, no drag marks in the dirt. Just a blue North Face backpack with the straps still buckled, sitting there like a monument to something wrong. I approached it carefully, my boots crunching on pine needles that carpeted the forest floor. The smell hit me first, copper and something else, something organic and rotting that made my stomach clench. Inside the backpack, I found a wallet belonging to Hunter Graves, a 28-year-old from Fresno who had checked in at the ranger station 2 days earlier. His hiking permit was still valid. His phone was in the side pocket, battery dead. His water bottles were full. Everything suggested he had simply vanished mid-hike, leaving all his supplies behind. But it was what I found at the bottom of the pack that made my hand start shaking. A handful of teeth, human teeth, still bloody at the roots. I radioed it in immediately, my voice steadier than I felt. "Central, this is Ranger Black. I've got a situation on the giant forest trail. Possible missing hiker. Need backup and a search team. Over." The response came back crackling with static. "Copy that, Rowan. What is your exact location?" I gave them my coordinates and waited, keeping my distance from the backpack as if it might suddenly spring to life. While I stood there in that suffocating fog, I heard it for the first time. A sound that I would come to know too well in the weeks ahead. It started low, almost subsonic, a thrumming that seemed to come from the earth itself. Then it rose in pitch, becoming a series of clicks and whistles that sounded almost like speech. Almost, but not quite. The kind of sound that makes every primitive part of your brain scream that you are in the presence of a predator. The sequoias around me seemed to absorb the sound, their massive trunks vibrating with frequencies I could feel in my chest. I pulled my service weapon, scanning the fog, but I could see nothing beyond 20 feet. The sound continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped as abruptly as it had started. In the silence that followed, I realized something else. The forest had gone completely quiet. No birds, no squirrels chittering in the branches, no insects, just silence, so absolute it felt like pressure against my eardrums. Backup arrived 20 minutes later. My fellow ranger, a solid guy named Elias Thornwood, who had worked Sequoia for 15 years, took one look at my face and knew something was seriously wrong. "Rowan," he said quietly, "you look like you have seen a ghost." "I wish it was a ghost," I muttered, showing him the backpack and its contents. Elias went pale when he saw the teeth. "We need to get forensics out here. and we need to find Hunter Graves, now. We organized a search party that included 6 rangers, 2 search and rescue volunteers, and a tracking dog named Bear. We started at the backpack location and worked outward in a grid pattern, calling Hunter's name until our voices echoed off the ancient trees. The fog made it slow going, visibility was terrible, and more than once I had the unsettling feeling that we were being watched. Not just watched, studied, evaluated. Bear, the tracking dog, picked up a scent and led us off trail, deeper into an area of the forest that saw fewer visitors. The sequoias here grew even larger, their bases so wide it would take 20 people holding hands to encircle them. Some of these trees had been saplings when Rome was still an empire. They had seen generations of humans come and go. And they had seen other things too, things that left marks. We found the first marks about a mile from the trail, scratches on a sequoia trunk, deep gouges that ran vertically down the bark for about 8 feet. The cuts were fresh, sap still oozing from the wounds, but what made my blood run cold was the pattern. 5 parallel lines, each about 2 inches apart, carved with such force that they had penetrated nearly 3 inches into the hardwood beneath the bark. No animal I knew could make marks like that. Certainly no animal with enough strength to dig that deep into a sequoia, one of the hardest woods on earth. Elias ran his fingers along the gouges. What the hell could do this? I do not know, I said, but whatever it is big, and strong enough to tear through wood that can withstand forest fires. Bear started barking, a high-pitched, frantic sound that made the hair on my neck stand up. The dog was trained not to bark during searches unless it found something. We hurried over to where Bear was pawing at the ground near a fallen log. That is when we found the second piece of evidence, a boot. Just one boot, torn and bloody with something still inside it. I did not need to look closer to know what that something was. We found more pieces over the next hour, scattered across maybe 200 yards of forest floor. Scraps of clothing, more teeth, bones that looked like they had been gnawed on by something with jaws powerful enough to crack femurs like twigs. But we never found enough to make up a complete body. It was as if Hunter Graves had been taken apart and distributed through the forest deliberately, almost ritualistically. What really disturbed me was the placement. The pieces were arranged in a rough circle around a massive sequoia that had to be at least 2,000 years old. At the base of this tree, someone or something had cleared away the pine needles and drawn symbols in the dirt. Complex geometric patterns that hurt to look at, as if they existed in more dimensions than my eyes could properly process. In the center of the patterns was a pile of bones, old bones, weathered and gray. These were not from Hunter Graves. These had been here for years, maybe decades. "This is a feeding ground," Elias said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something uses this spot regularly. I photographed everything with my phone, trying to keep my hand steady. We need to get forensics and law enforcement out here. This is way beyond our pay grade." We marked the location with GPS coordinates and retreated back to the trail. Bear seemed eager to leave, pulling at his leash with unusual urgency. Even the search and rescue volunteers, tough men and women who had seen their share of grim discoveries, looked shaken. We had all felt it. The sense that we had trespassed into something's territory, that we had seen something we were not meant to see. Back at the ranger station, I filed my report and called the Tulare County Sheriff's Department. They sent Detective Sarah Martinez, a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in suspicious deaths. When I showed her the photos, her professional composure cracked for just a moment. Her face went pale and her jaw tightened. "You are telling me this was all done by an animal?" she asked. "I do not know what did it," I replied honestly, "but I have never seen an animal killed like this. The arrangement, the symbols, this feels deliberate." Detective Martinez spent 3 days processing the scene with her forensics team. What they found only deepened the mystery. The bones in the pile at the tree's base belonged to at least 7 different individuals, all human, ranging in age from the recent to possibly a century old. The symbols drawn in the dirt contained trace elements of blood mixed with ash and some kind of organic compound they could not identify. Most disturbing of all, they found more of those massive claw marks on trees throughout a 2-mile radius, always in groups of 5, always carved with incredible force. The official cause of death for Hunter Graves was listed as animal attack, species unknown. Detective Martinez did not like it any more than I did, but what else could we call it? We had no suspect, no weapon. No clear narrative that made sense. Just a young man torn apart in the forest and his remains scattered like offerings to something ancient and hungry. I should have left it alone, should have accepted the official explanation and moved on. But I could not. Because 3 nights after we found Hunter Graves, I heard that sound again. The thrumming, the clicks, the almost speech. It was coming from the forest beyond my cabin, echoing through the darkness. And this time, I heard something else mixed in with it. A voice. My voice. Saying words I had never spoken. Rowan Black. Rowan Black. Come to the trees. Come to the old places. Come and see. I grabbed my flashlight and my weapon and went to the window. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see the tree line about 50 yards from my cabin, and standing just inside that tree line, partially hidden by fog and shadow, was a shape. Tall. Too tall to be human. It stood on 2 legs, but the proportions were all wrong. The arms hung too low, nearly to the ground. The head was elongated, almost conical. And even from that distance, even in the poor light, I could see that it had no eyes, just smooth dark skin where eyes should be. But it was looking at me. I could feel its attention like a physical weight. We stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then it took a step backward and was gone, melting into the darkness between the sequoias as if it had never existed. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew that Hunter Graves had probably seen it too, right before the end. I did not sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table and started researching. I went through old ranger reports, newspaper archives, any record of disappearances in Sequoia National Forest. What I found made my stomach sink. Hunter Graves was not an anomaly. He was the latest in a long line of disappearances stretching back to the 1920s when Sequoia first became a national park. Before that, there were records from the logging era, workers who vanished, bodies found torn apart, always in the same areas of the forest, always near the oldest, largest sequoias. I found a journal entry from 1935, written by a ranger named Thomas Crawford. He described finding a hiker's remains arranged in a circle around a giant sequoia with strange symbols drawn in the dirt. His entry ended with a chilling note. The local Yokuts people say something lives in the old forest. They call it different names. The Watcher of Roots, the thing that walks on ancient ground. They say it has been here since before the trees were seedlings. They say it does not like to be disturbed. The Yokuts were the indigenous people who had lived in this area for thousands of years before European settlement. I had met a few members of the local Yokuts community during cultural education events at the park. I decided to reach out to them to see if anyone knew about these old stories. That is how I met Eleanor Whitehawk, an elderly Yokuts woman who served as a cultural historian for her tribe. When I called her and explained what I had found, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then she said, "You should come to my home. This is not something to discuss over the phone." I drove to her house in 3 Rivers the next afternoon. Eleanor was in her 70s, with long gray hair and eyes that seemed to see right through you. She invited me in and made tea, moving with deliberate slowness that I recognized as someone gathering their thoughts. When we finally sat down, she looked at me seriously. "My grandmother told me stories about the old forest," she began, "stories that were passed down for generations. She said that when the world was young, when the great trees first started growing, something else came with them, something that was not quite animal, not quite spirit. It lived in symbiosis with the sequoias, feeding on what entered the forest, protecting the old trees from harm. The Yokuts learned to respect it, to make offerings, to stay away from certain groves, especially around the oldest trees." "Is it still there?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Eleanor nodded slowly. "It never left. Why would it? The forest is its home. But as more people came, as the logging started, as the park was established and trails were cut through its territory, it became angry, defensive. The offerings stopped. The respect was forgotten. Now it takes what it needs, what it believes is owed. How do we stop it?" Her expression was sad. "You do not stop something that has existed for thousands of years. You learn to coexist. You restore the old boundaries. You give it what it needs so it does not take more than necessary." "And what does it need?" Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. "In the old days, we would leave offerings at the base of certain trees, food, objects of value. Sometimes, in times of great need, blood, not human blood, but animal blood, to show respect, to acknowledge its sovereignty over that territory. When the offerings stopped, it started taking its own. I thought about hunter graves, about the bones piled at the base of that ancient sequoia, about the symbols drawn in blood and ash. You are saying it is hunting people because we stopped making offerings? I am saying it is taking what it has always taken, life energy. But without the framework of respect and ritual, it is taking that energy in the only way it knows how, through death. I left Eleanor's house with my head spinning. How was I supposed to explain this to my superiors? To Detective Martinez? That we had a prehistoric entity living in Sequoia National Forest that was killing people because we had violated some ancient agreement? They would think I had lost my mind. But I had seen it. Standing in the fog, looking at me with no eyes, speaking with my voice. That night, I could not stay in my cabin. The forest felt too close, too aware. Instead, I went to the main ranger station and slept on the couch in the break room with all the lights on. Elias found me there in the morning, looking concerned. "Rowan, what is going on? You look terrible." I told him everything. The shape in the fog, Eleanor's stories, the pattern of disappearances. To his credit, Elias did not dismiss it outright. He had worked in these woods long enough to know that something was not right. He had felt the same wrongness I had felt. "So what do we do?" he asked. "I have been thinking about that," I said. "We need to close the areas where the disappearances happen most frequently. Officially close them. No public access. And we need to start making offerings again, the way the Yokuts used to. If there is even a chance it will work, we have to try." Elias looked skeptical. "You realize how insane that sounds, right? We are going to tell the Park Service that we need to close prime sequoia groves because of a forest monster, and also we need to start leaving ritual offerings?" "When you put it that way," I admitted. "But what is the alternative? Wait for more people to die?" We spent the next week documenting everything we could find. More claw marks, more symbols carved into bark, areas where the forest went unnaturally quiet. We presented our findings to the park superintendent, carefully framing it as a dangerous predator situation, without mentioning what we really thought the predator was. To our surprise, she agreed to temporary closures of the affected areas, citing public safety concerns. But the closures came too late for the next victim. Her name was Victoria Ross, a 35-year-old botanist who had come to Sequoia to study the Sequoia Grove's mycorrhizal networks. She was experienced, careful, always checked in at the ranger station. When she did not return from her scheduled hike, we knew immediately something was wrong. We found her 3 days later in one of the closed areas. She had apparently ignored the closure signs, perhaps thinking they did not apply to research scientists. What we found was worse than hunter graves, much worse. Victoria had been taken apart with surgical precision. Her organs had been removed and arranged in a pattern around a sequoia that had to be 3,000 years old. Her bones had been cleaned of flesh and stacked in a cairn, and carved into the tree trunk above her remains was a message, not in English, not in any language I recognized, but somehow I could understand it anyway, as if the meaning was being transmitted directly into my mind. "This is sacred ground. This is old ground. Respect what was here first." Detective Martinez came back out looking even more disturbed than the first time. "This has to stop," she said to me. "Whatever is doing this, we need to find it and stop it. But how do you stop something that is not really an animal? Something that might be as old as the trees themselves?" I did not say this to Martinez, but I was thinking it. We were dealing with something beyond our understanding, something that existed in the spaces between biology and myth. That night, I did something I probably should not have done. I went back to the grove where we had found Victoria Ross, alone, carrying a backpack full of offerings, dried meat, tobacco, a knife that had belonged to my grandfather, and a mason jar of deer blood that I had gotten from a local hunter. I was going to try to restore the old agreement, to show respect the way Eleanor had described. The grove was terrifying at night. The sequoias blocked out most of the moonlight, creating pools of absolute darkness between the massive trunks. My flashlight beam seemed pathetically small against such overwhelming shadow. I could hear sounds in the darkness, movement, breathing. The forest was watching me. I could feel it. I found the tree where Victoria had died and knelt at its base. I laid out the offerings carefully, arranging them in a circle the way I had seen in the old photographs from Eleanor's collection. Then I poured the deer blood over them, watching it soak into the ground. I did not know any prayers or ritual words, so I just spoke from the heart. I know you are here, I said to the darkness. I know you have been here longer than any of us, longer than the park, longer than the trails. We have disrespected your territory. We have ignored the old agreements. I cannot speak for everyone, but I am here to acknowledge you, to show respect. Please, accept these offerings. Please, let there be peace between us. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then I heard it, that thrumming sound, starting low and building, the clicks and whistles. And this time, I heard words. Real words, spoken in a voice that sounded like rocks grinding together, like wind through ancient branches, like the earth itself speaking. You see me, Rowan Black. You acknowledge me. That is good. That is the first step. But respect must be earned, must be proven. Your kind has taken much from this forest. The trees you cut, the trails you carved, the fires you fought that would have renewed the soil. You have much to atone for. I am willing, I said, my voice shaking. Tell me what I need to do. Protect the old places, the voice said. Keep your kind away from the sacred groves. Make the offerings as was done before. Do this, and I will limit my feeding. I will take only what is necessary. But if you fail, if your kind continues to disrespect this forest, I will take what I need, and I will take it slowly, painfully, so that others will learn through their screams. I will do it, I promised. I will protect the old places. Then go, Rowan Black. Go, and remember this night. Remember what you have seen, what you have heard. The knowledge carries a price. You will never walk these woods the same way again. I left the grove, my legs shaking so badly I could barely walk. I did not look back. I did not want to see what was behind me, collecting the offerings, watching me leave. But I could feel its attention on my back all the way to my truck, a pressure that did not lift until I was on the main road with my headlights cutting through normal darkness. The next morning, I met with the park superintendent and pitched my plan. We would permanently close the groves where the deaths had occurred. We would post armed rangers at the entry points. We would frame it as habitat protection, endangered species monitoring, anything that would keep people out. And secretly, I would continue making offerings. The superintendent looked at me like I might be losing my mind, but the recent deaths had shaken everyone. She agreed to the closures on a trial basis. Over the next 6 months, we implemented everything. The sacred groves were closed, fences were erected, signs were posted, and once a month, I would hike into those closed areas alone and leave offerings at the bases of the oldest trees. Meat, tobacco, items of personal value, and always, blood. Usually deer blood, but sometimes my own. Small amounts, just enough to show commitment, to show respect. The killing stopped, or rather, they became less frequent. Every few months, someone would disappear. Usually someone who had ignored the closure signs, who had climbed the fences, who had ventured where they should not. We would find the remains days later, arranged in the now familiar patterns, but the frequency dropped dramatically, from multiple deaths per month to maybe one every season. It was not perfect, but it was better. Elias noticed the change in me, the way I would not walk certain trails anymore, the way I would sometimes stop mid-patrol and just listen, as if I could hear something no one else could. One night over beers, he asked me directly, "Rowan, did you see it? The thing that is killing people?" I thought about lying, about keeping it to myself. But Elias deserved the truth. "Yes," I said, "I have seen it. I have talked to it. And Elias, it is not an animal. It is something else. Something old. Something that has as much right to be here as the trees themselves. Maybe more." "What does it want?" "Respect," I said. "And to be left alone in the old places. That is all it has ever wanted." Elias was quiet for a long time. "Can you live with that? Knowing it is out there? Knowing it still kills sometimes?" "I do not think I have a choice," I replied. "This is my forest, my responsibility. If making offerings and keeping people out of certain areas saves lives, then that is what I will do, even if nobody else understands why." 2 years have passed since I made my agreement with the entity in the forest. 2 years of monthly offerings, of closed groves, of standing watch over ancient territory that humans should never have entered in the first place. The disappearances have not stopped completely. They never will. But they have been reduced to a level that can almost be explained away as normal wilderness hazards. People ignoring warning signs. People taking stupid risks. The kind of deaths that happen in every national park. But I know the truth. I carry it with me every day. Every time I patrol the trails, every time I help a lost hiker, every time I look at those massive sequoias reaching toward the sky, I know what watches from the shadows between them. I have seen its eyeless face. I have heard its grinding voice. I have felt its ancient intelligence evaluating me, measuring me, deciding whether I am worthy of the temporary truce we have established. Elias knows too now. I told him everything, and together we maintain the offerings and the boundaries. We are the only ones who know why certain groves are really closed, why certain trails end abruptly, why there are areas of Sequoia National Forest that will never be opened to the public, no matter how much pressure we get from tourist boards or hiking groups. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear it, that thrumming sound, those clicks and whistles, and sometimes, though I have never told anyone this, I hear it speaking, not threats, just observations, comments about the forest, about the trees, about the cycles of growth and decay that have played out for millennia while humans were barely learning to walk upright. It speaks to me like I am a student, and it is the teacher, sharing knowledge that no modern science has discovered, telling me secrets about the sequoias that would revolutionize biology if I could ever prove them. But I will never share those secrets, because they were told in confidence, in the darkness, between one witness and one ancient being that exists outside the normal rules of nature. To share them would be to break trust, and breaking trust with something that powerful, something that hungry, would be fatal. I know what you are thinking. You think I should report this, should call in the military or scientists or someone who can deal with it properly. But that is the arrogance talking. The human arrogance that got us into this situation in the first place. The belief that we can control nature, that we can study and understand and dominate everything we encounter. That entity in the old forest does not need to be dealt with. It needs to be respected, left alone, given the space it has occupied for thousands of years. My name is Rowan Black. I am the head ranger of Sequoia National Forest, and I am the guardian of a secret that predates human civilization. I keep the offerings. I maintain the boundaries. I protect both the people who visit this forest and the ancient thing that has always lived here. It is a balancing act, a tightrope walk between two worlds, and I know that one day I will slip. One day I will make a mistake. And when that happens, the entity will take what it is owed. But until then, I stand watch. I walk the trails during the day and listen to the forest at night. I make sure the closed groves stay closed. I make sure the offerings are made. I make sure that the temporary peace we have carved out of fear and respect and ancient agreements holds for as long as possible. If you ever visit Sequoia National Forest, please respect the closure signs. Do not climb the fences. Do not venture into areas marked as restricted. Those restrictions are not arbitrary. They are not bureaucratic nonsense. They are boundaries, sacred boundaries that protect you from something your rational mind cannot accept. Something that has been here since the first sequoia seed sprouted in soil that had never known a human footprint. Stay on the marked trails. Camp in designated areas. Do not wander off alone, especially at dusk when the fog rolls in thick between the ancient trees. And if you hear a sound like thrumming, like the earth itself breathing, turn around immediately. Do not investigate. Do not try to find the source. Just leave, as quickly and quietly as you can. Because once you see it, once you truly understand what shares this forest with us, you can never unsee it. The knowledge changes you, marks you. You become part of the secret, part of the balance, and that is a heavier burden than any human should have to carry. I carry it because I have to, because I saw what I saw by the river at dusk, because my radio cut out mid-word and I smelled metal in the air, because I made promises in the darkness that I cannot break. This is my forest, my responsibility, my burden and my privilege. The sequoias will stand for thousands more years, long after I am gone, and the thing that lives among them will endure just as long. It was here first. It has earned its place through sheer persistence, through surviving ice ages and droughts and fires that would have destroyed anything less ancient. We are the newcomers, the interlopers, and if we are wise, we will remember that. This is Sequoia National Forest. This is where giants grow and shadows walk and ancient agreements must be honored. This is where I learned that some boundaries should never be crossed. Some territories should never be claimed. Some things should be left alone in the old places where they have always been. I am Rowan Black, and I know what watches from the dark between the trees. I know what awaits those who disrespect the sacred groves. And I know that my job is not to control the forest, but to help humans coexist with something far older and far more powerful than we will ever be. The forest keeps its secrets. The entity keeps its vigil, and I keep my promises, made in blood and fear and reluctant respect. That is all any of us can do. That is all the forest asks, and pray that it is enough.